Chapter 1422. Amongst the numerous worlds of the Tao discussion, it had always been the living being corresponding to the holy venerable that was far in the lead, and it occupied the highest peak without any objection. Moreover, it was a peak that was countless times more noble than the other living beings. They were already used to this. The watermark advertisement test had even unknowingly produced a feeling that this was how it should be under normal circumstances. In the Tao discussion heavens, the saints should have occupied the absolute peak. However, they did not expect that in this Tao discussion heavens, the position of the creature corresponding to the saint had already been threatened before the various situations within the Tao discussion heavens had developed to the end. This naturally made them focus their attention on the creature corresponding to Luo Fan, and they finally began to realize how extraordinary the Tao that Luo Fan cultivated was, and how great its potential was. Similarly, the saint, who had always been invincible, also really noticed the uniqueness of Luo Fan, but he could not help but focus his attention on the creature corresponding to Luo Fan. Even Luo Fan could clearly feel that the saint's perception was focused on those creatures, and he could feel that the saint was comprehending everything about those creatures by empathizing with them. Feeling this situation, Luo Fan's heart did not fluctuate at all. The Tao that he displayed was only a Tao fruit great Tao. It was just the kind of specialized cultivation method that was created based on the worldview of the laws. It did not involve his true cultivation foundation at all. However, compared to the Tao that other people cultivated, his Tao fruit, great Tao, and worldview were completely suitable for his Tao. Such a Tao, even in terms of pure level, might not be stronger than the Tao cultivated by other level 9 pseudo-saints. However, for the creatures corresponding to him in the Tao discussion heavens, it was more suitable for him than any other Tao. Under such circumstances, the Tao fruit great Tao that Green cultivated would naturally far surpass the Tao cultivated by those creatures who only seemed to be suitable for them on the surface, be it in terms of speed or potential. In this way, the creatures corresponding to Luo Fan gradually separated from the crowd in the process of development. Gradually, they could be comparable to the creatures corresponding to the saint, whose Tao was only suitable for them on the surface. That was only natural. Everyone else was surprised by the behavior of the creature corresponding to Luo Fan, but Luo Fan himself was not surprised at all. While the others were attentively trying to understand the cultivation method of their corresponding creatures, Luo Fan was more focused on the corresponding creatures of the Lord. He used his own heart to feel the cultivation process of those living beings and put himself in their shoes. As those creatures grew bit by bit, they grew up, cultivating bit by bit. The Lord had taken 10 different paths. Although 9 of them had been proven to be unable to bring him to the saint realm, they could allow him to attack the saint realm without dying, allowing him to obtain a holy decree. This was enough to show how profound the 9 paths of cultivation were. Moreover, because he had taken 10 paths in a row, each path had improved and improved compared to the previous one. Climbing up the steps like this, Luo Fan was able to clearly see the various advantages and disadvantages of those 10 paths, as well as the flaws in all of them. When he compared it with the Tao fruit great Tao that he cultivated, he felt that he had gained a lot almost all the time, and he could feel that his Tao was improving almost all the time. This brought him more benefits than the Tao that other cultivators cultivated. The Lord was the creator of countless Tao discussion worlds, so all the changes in the Tao discussion worlds would naturally be affected by him. In the past, because he was absolutely invincible, his mentality was extremely aloof. He did not care too much about the Taos that other cultivators cultivated. At most, he would only look down from above and occasionally comment on the highlights of their Taos. With such a mentality, there would naturally not be any special changes in the Tao discussion worlds. However, this time, he found that the Tao that Luo Fan cultivated could actually challenge the Tao that he had created after 9 consecutive experiments and constant adjustments. It was actually not inferior to the Tao that he cultivated at all. So how could he still maintain his previous mentality? When his attention was focused on the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan, the Tao discussion worlds naturally underwent various changes. As if the general trend had changed, the various changes encountered by the creatures corresponding to Luo Fan became more and more frequent, becoming more and more bizarre. The dangers they encountered became more and more numerous, and the various fortuitous encounters they encountered also became many times more numerous than before. It was as if the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan were suddenly given the protagonist's halo in those worlds. Such an obvious change naturally attracted the attention of many cultivators. For a moment, even the cultivators that did not pay attention to the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan all focused their attention on the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan. They were all powerful beings at the pseudo-sage level, so they were naturally extremely sensitive to the changes in the Tao discussion world. How could the changes that were obviously centered on the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan be hidden from them? Although this change seemed unfair, it was as if the Tao discussion worlds had suddenly changed from being centered on everyone to being centered on Luo Fan. It was as if all the Tao discussion worlds had become dedicated to serving Luo Fan. However, none of the cultivators present felt any dissatisfaction in their hearts. On the contrary, every cultivator felt indescribably surprised at this moment. The growth of the creatures in the Tao discussion world and the development of the situation could reflect the difference in the Tao that many cultivators cultivated. However, in the end, it was merely an empty reputation. How could there be any real impact? In contrast, although the current change might make the final result unfair and reflect the difference in the Tao that everyone cultivated, it could allow them to have a deeper understanding of the Tao that Luo Fan cultivated, which is comparable to the Tao that the Holy Venerables cultivated by 100 times. This was an extremely rare opportunity. Compared to the final illusory fairness, this was obviously 100 times more important. How should they choose? For them, there was no hesitation at all. For the creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan, the changes in the Tao discussion world soon led to many of the creatures that corresponded to him in the Tao discussion world to stand out and challenge the creatures that corresponded to the Holy Venerables. Many of them even succeeded and occupied the top positions in the Tao discussion world. However, there were more. It was in the kind of danger that was created out of thin air. Their bodies died, their Tao disappeared, and their souls scattered. Danger and adventure coexisted, but it was impossible to encounter adventure every time, and it was impossible to overcome danger every time. Compared to danger, after all, there were few adventures. There was a possibility that the danger could not be overcome. After all, it was still a lot. If it was in a normal world, everything would naturally be over once one's life and death disappeared, and one's soul scattered. However, in the Tao discussion world, the many creatures themselves were formed from information. As long as the information did not disappear, these creatures could not disappear even if their souls were scattered. Therefore, after the souls of the many creatures that encountered danger were scattered, they were quickly reborn in the Tao discussion world and began the same legendary experience of danger accompanied by adventure. If they encountered an adventure, they would naturally soar into the sky and continue to improve. In the end, they would rush to their original height at an unimaginable speed and challenge the Holy Venerables again. If they encountered danger that they could not resist, they would die and be reborn. Then, a new cycle would begin. In this way, the final result was that almost every creature that corresponded to Luo Fan in the Tao discussion world had an amazing adventure and gradually began to challenge the Holy Venerables. Time continued like this, and the development of the situation in the Tao discussion world gradually unified. The creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan finally fully displayed the potential of their cultivation path after countless adventures, challenges, and restarts. They all defeated the creatures that corresponded to the Holy Venerables and finally occupied the absolute peak of the Tao discussion world, replacing the original status of the creatures that corresponded to the Holy Venerables. At this time, 100 years had passed in the Cloud Sea world. If converted to the time in the Tao discussion world, it was unknown how many trillions of years had passed. At this moment, almost all the cultivators in the Cloud Sea world were filled with shock. From time to time, They would cast their gazes in the direction where Luo Fan was. The way things had developed in the Tao discussion heaven and earth was beyond their imagination. Originally, they knew from the development of the situation in the Tao discussion world that Luo Fan's cultivation path might not be much different from the Holy Venerable's cultivation path. However, they did not expect him to be this strong. He actually had the potential to surpass the Holy Venerable's cultivation path. He actually had the potential to surpass the previous level, 9 pseudo-saints cultivation path. No wonder he can surpass the strength of a level 9 pseudo-saint with the body of a level 6 pseudo-saint. This thought unknowingly appeared in everyone's mind. At this time, no one thought that he could participate in this Tao discussion world because of his identity and background. Therefore, the cultivators truly believed that he could participate in this Tao discussion world because of his strength. Even though there were countless adventures and countless dangers, the nature of those creatures' cultivation path did not change. If their cultivation path did not have the potential, it would be impossible for them to reach the corresponding status. The creatures that corresponded to Luo Fan were able to reach the peak after countless adventures and dangers. This meant that Luo Fan's cultivation path had the potential to surpass the Holy Venerable's cultivation path and reach the peak. At this point, the Holy Venerables slowly opened their eyes and looked at Luo Fan with an extremely complicated gaze. His eyes were filled with excitement, anticipation, disappointment, and bewilderment. He was excited and expectant because he could actually encounter such a path of cultivation with such great potential in the last lesson before he was about to break through to the saint realm. It made him feel that he could still improve further, allowing him to reap real benefits from this Dharma discussion that had almost become a mere formality. On the other hand, he was disappointed and confused because his cultivation path, which he had gone through 9 paths, modified countless times, and improved countless times, was actually not as good as the one in front of him, who had obviously only cultivated for 1 lifetime. Moreover, this cultivation path was created by a cultivator who had cultivated for less than a fraction of his time. This was a great irony for someone who had always thought that he was a genius and would definitely become a sage in the end. Moreover, more importantly, the truth was clearly in front of him. He clearly knew that the other party's cultivation path could reach the peak and had the potential to surpass the cultivation path of all the level 9 pseudo-saints present. However, he still could not see what was so wonderful about this cultivation path and what was so exquisite about it. Why did this cultivation path, which seemed to be ordinary and even much worse than other cultivation paths, actually have such potential? How could he not be dejected? How could he not be at a loss? Luo Fan did not care about everyone's gazes, the development in front of him. To him, it was not strange at all. After all, his Tao fruit, Tao had a worldview that was completely suitable for him as the foundation. Even if it did not seem to be at an incredible level on the surface, it was the cultivation path that was most suitable for him. Over a long period of time, it could surpass the cultivation path of other living beings. This couldn't be any more normal. During these hundreds of years, everyone was comprehending his cultivation path, but Luo Fan had already comprehended the cultivation path of all the cultivators, including the Holy Venerables, more than once. Through this comprehension, he felt that his horizons had been greatly broadened. In a trance, he already felt that his cultivation realm had once again been greatly improved, and he vaguely felt that he was about to come into contact with the 7th step below the sage stage. Although he still could not really step onto the 7th step and become a level 7 pseudo-saint, he was already extremely satisfied. After all, how long had it been since he became a level 6 pseudo-saint? Now, in just over 100 years, he was actually able to come into contact with the next level. This speed could be said to be enough to make anyone dumbfounded. How could he not be satisfied? On this day, the situation in the various worlds had completely stabilized. Seeing that no matter how the Divine Sovereign challenged, it was impossible to replace him, the Divine Sovereign let out a sigh. With a wave of his hand, the worlds above him collapsed one by one. As the Tao discussion heaven and earth collapsed, The information of the countless living beings in the Tao discussion heaven and earth merged again. They turned into clouds and began to gradually separate from the holy venerables clouds, and once again descended above the heads of the cultivators present. Because they had already separated from the other auspicious clouds, these auspicious clouds once again revealed their original color and appearance. In this way, the entire cloud sea world became colorful. The clouds of different colors and shapes decorated the cloud sea world, making it look extremely mysterious and otherworldly. Such a change caused everyone to break out from the state of being immersed in the Tao discussion heaven and earth. At this moment, even Luo Fan felt a sense of loss. Not to mention the others. Fellow Taoist Luo Zun, I wonder if you can discuss Tao with me alone? At this moment, such a voice entered Luo Fan's ears. It was the holy venerable's voice that contained indescribable mysteriousness. Hearing this, Luo Fan was slightly taken aback. He turned his head and saw the holy venerables looking at him indifferently. However, unlike the indifference on his face, there was indescribable anticipation in his eyes. Hearing this, the bookmaster and the others were shocked. They opened their mouths as if they wanted to stop the holy venerables, but they didn't dare to speak due to the holy venerable's prestige. Discuss Tao alone? I wonder how fellow Taoist Luo Fan wants to discuss Tao? Didn't fellow Taoist understand all of my Tao just now? If Luo Fan had addressed the holy venerables as a fellow Taoist, many of the level 9 pseudo-saints present would definitely think that Luo Fan was arrogant. However, at this moment, after experiencing the strange development of the Tao discussion heaven and earth, even the bookmaster and the others no longer had any opinion on this. Instead, they even felt that it was reasonable and felt that if Luo Fan didn't address the holy venerables as such, he would be being unreasonable. In this world, those who were more powerful came first. Luo Fan had already proven that his Tao had the potential to surpass everyone present, so he was naturally the one who was more powerful and qualified to be treated equally with everyone. The holy venerables said, although I already have some understanding of your Tao from the discussion just now, I don't know why, but I always feel that my understanding is limited to the surface. There seems to be a deeper secret behind it, but I just can't understand it no matter how hard I try. Therefore, I am willing to use my own Tao to directly interact with fellow Taoists, Tao to communicate with each other. What do you think? Luo Fan instantly understood the meaning of the holy venerables. To use one's Tao to directly contact and communicate with Luo Fan's Tao was to directly manifest one's Tao cultivation into auspicious clouds, and then let these auspicious clouds come into contact with each other, allowing the two Taoists to fight and blend in the process. During this process, the mystery between the two Taoists would be revealed without any concealment. This was also a method of Tao discussion, but it was a method without any concealment. A method of Tao discussion that left no room for negotiation, compared to the Tao discussion heaven and earth previously, transforming one's own Tao cultivation into living creatures and cultivating in those heavens and earth, so that everyone could feel all the feelings, growth, and progress of everyone's Tao cultivation at the same time. For all emotions, this method, but it was more direct. Of course, in this way, the outcome would be better and worse. There would be no room for negotiation. The winner would naturally have all the fame, and the loser would naturally be suppressed in all aspects, losing even his underwear. It was precisely because the advantages and disadvantages of this method of Tao discussion were so obvious that it was usually not used in Tao discussion sessions. Unless there was a deep hatred between the two parties and they wanted to see who was better, only people who could not stand the sight of each other would use this method of Tao discussion. Now, as the most powerful venerable who was the closest to the sage realm, as an existence who had occupied the top position in countless sea regions for billions of years, the holy venerables clearly knew that his Tao cultivation might not be as good as Luo Fan's, but he still dared to suggest using this method to discuss Tao. This broad-mindedness and boldness made Luo Fan involuntarily admire him. Since the holy venerables were so broad-minded, Luo Fan naturally would not refuse. He directly said, "Since you have this intention, I will respectfully accept." This method of directly manifesting one's Tao to fight and blend in was something that he had rarely done with others. Now that he could have such a Tao discussion with the holy venerables who occupied the top position in countless sea regions, it was exactly what he wanted. Although the Tao discussion in the Tao discussion heaven and earth was wonderful, and although he could comprehend the holy venerables' Tao cultivation, there was a gap after all. How could there be such a direct and in-depth Tao discussion method? Hearing that Luo Fan had agreed, the holy venerable's eyes were filled with joy. He raised his hand and waved. The platform that Luo Fan was sitting on quickly drifted toward the center of the Cloud Sea world, which was the platform where the holy venerables were. In a short while, the two platforms were almost joined together and became the center of the entire Cloud Sea world. At this moment, the book venerables and the others finally plucked up their courage to speak. "Master, you can't," the book venerables said. "This matter is too important. No matter who wins or loses, it won't do you any good." "That's right, Master. Let's use another method," the remnant venerables also advised. The others also kept trying to persuade the holy venerables to give up this dangerous idea and use another method to discuss Tao with Luo Fan. They even suggested many alternative methods to advise the holy venerables. Each of these methods was very delicate, but none of them were as direct as the holy venerable suggestion. They were also not as deep. There was a gap between them. In this way, no matter who won or lost, it would not be easy to see, but they would still be able to achieve the goal of the Tao discussion. At this moment, many other cultivators also had a strange look on their faces. Some of them were looking forward to it, some could not bear it, and some were obviously against it. There were all kinds of reasons. "Shut up." At this moment, the holy venerables suddenly shouted coldly. This cold shout contained unparalleled majesty. In an instant, it caused the entire Cloud Sea world to shake violently. It felt like the entire Cloud Sea world could not withstand his anger. The sky darkened in an instant. Chapter 14:23. "Look at you. Are you still a Taoist?" the Lord said coldly. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement, test. The voice contained a kind of power that could shake one's soul. The bookmaster and the others who were targeted by the voice were shocked. Countless thoughts were pulled out from the depths of their memories. All kinds of experiences over the past hundreds of millions of years flashed through their minds at an unimaginable speed. In an instant, they deeply realized the mistakes they had made, and they all looked ashamed. Even Luo Fan and the others, who were not targeted by this sound, felt their minds tremble. They felt that this sound seemed to have the power to directly reach their hearts. Listening to this sound, they felt as if this was the sound of their own souls. "You're indeed the Lord," Luo Fan sighed at this moment. After making the bookmaster and the others feel ashamed, the Lord said to Luo Fan, "Please." Luo Fan nodded without hesitation. With a thought, the Tao that he cultivated turned into a gray cloud that appeared above his head out of thin air. With Luo Fan's cultivation achievement, the cloud could cover an area of hundreds of millions of miles if it was completely spread out. Here, due to the restrictions of the Cloud Sea world, he only spread out a few dozen acres and then stopped. Seeing that Luo Fan had shown his device, the Lord nodded and also released the Tao that he cultivated from the top of his head, which turned into a colorful, extremely strange cloud. The cloud that he released was also the same as that of Luo Fan. It was spread out dozens of acres in size, right in the middle of their two platforms, where they intersected at this moment. All of the pseudo-holiness stage cultivators in the Cloud Sea world wore expressions of anticipation and solemnity. Even if it happened between ninth-grade pseudo-saints, they would be able to watch it. Now that it happened between the heavenly venerable and Luo Fan, it was obviously more attractive to them, and even more shocking. The book supreme, and the rest were awakened by the Lord's words. Although they were still a little nervous, they were also looking forward to it. The moment the chaotic color of the auspicious cloud above Luo Fan and the colorful auspicious cloud above the Lord's head came into contact, It was as if the entire cloud sea world was shaking. All of the cultivators in the cloud sea realm instantly felt as if everything around them had suddenly begun to tremble in a strange manner. In a trance, they felt that this world, this heaven and earth, this universe, it seemed to be overwhelmed by the direct contact between the two Taos, although it was the same auspicious cloud that came into contact with it. But directly discussing the Tao, it was fundamentally different from the Tao discussion heaven and earth from before. Although there were more points of contact between the overlapping auspicious clouds previously, there was still a conflict due to the Lord's guidance. The places where they fused were extremely restrained, and all of the power was transferred to the various places where the Tao was discussed. But now, the method of directly discussing the Tao was completely unscrupulous. The respective characteristics of the two Taos were exerted to the extreme, and they tried their best to suppress each other's characteristics, assimilate the differences between the other and themselves, and integrate the similarities between the other and themselves. Such a difference caused the effect of the moment when the two auspicious clouds came into contact with each other at this moment, which was completely different from the previous overlapping. At the boundary where the two clouds met, the chaotic colors and the colorful colors interweaved together. The boundary began to change rapidly from its original regular appearance, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a crisscrossed canine shape. At this moment, both Luo Fan and the Lord had already closed their eyes, and their entire souls were completely integrated with the auspicious clouds above their heads. They were extremely meticulous and subtle in sensing the conflict and integration between one Tao and the other Tao. In such a state, for both of them, everything in the outside world was already meaningless. What they were thinking and feeling were all the endless mysteries of the Tao and the truth of the heaven and earth. The subtlety of Luo Fan's Tao was not comparable to that of the Lord's Tao at first glance. When the two auspicious clouds came into contact with each other, although the gray auspicious cloud occasionally attacked and gained something, it was still retreating as a whole. Gradually, the colorful auspicious cloud expanded its range, and the gray auspicious cloud became smaller and smaller. This change made the bookmaster and the others look worried, although it seemed that the Lord had the upper hand at this time. However, they hadn't forgotten how the situation had developed during the Tao discussion world. In the beginning, in the Tao discussion world, didn't the creature corresponding to the Lord occupy the top position with an absolute advantage? In the end, no one knew what happened, but the creature corresponding to Luo Fan had unknowingly regained the upper hand. In the end, this absolute advantage was expanded to the point where it could not be reversed or shaken. In the Tao discussion world, it was also a discussion of Tao. Although there was a layer between them, the characteristics of the two Taos could also be seen. It could be seen what would happen in the Tao discussion world. Although the Lord had the upper hand now, who knew if it would develop like the situation in the Tao discussion world? Under such circumstances, how could the bookmaster and the others be happy so early? At this moment, Luo Fan did not care about the changes between the two auspicious clouds at all. He did not even control how his auspicious cloud attacked the Holy Senior's auspicious cloud. Instead, he allowed the auspicious cloud to move on its own. He allowed the Tao that was contained in the auspicious cloud to naturally move and fight with the Holy Senior's auspicious cloud and merge with it. It was not that he had much confidence in his Tao and felt that he could defeat the Lord without any control. It was because even if the auspicious cloud failed, there was no other impact on him except for the fact that his Tao was not comparable to the Lord's. Even if he won, it was just a name. His Tao might have more potential or be stronger than the Lord's, but there were no other benefits. Since there was no impact on success or failure, why should he interfere with the changes? He let the two kinds of Tao conflict and merge to produce the final result, and he would look at all the changes with a detached eye. To comprehend the various mysteries revealed when the two Taos clashed and fused. Compared to the last bit of fame, this was much better. With Luo Fan's temperament, it was already self-evident what choice he would make. Obviously, not only did Luo Fan think so, the Lord seemed to have the same idea. He also let the auspicious cloud evolve, but he was paying attention to the many mysteries and mysteries revealed in the process of the two auspicious clouds. The development of the two auspicious clouds coincided with the development of the Tao discussion world. Although the Tao that Luo Fan cultivated was not comparable to the Lord's Tao, at the beginning it was almost suppressed by half. This caused the auspicious cloud above Luo Fan's head to turn into a colorful appearance and merge with the Lord's auspicious cloud. However, at that moment, something seemed to have happened. The auspicious cloud above Luo Fan's head bounced back as if it hit the bottom. It suddenly began to quickly turn the colorful, auspicious cloud into a chaotic color, but it was done at a speed that made everyone dumbfounded. In turn, it eroded the auspicious cloud above the Lord's head. At this moment, many pseudo-sage level cultivators in the Cloud Sea world were dumbfounded. The Book Supreme and the others even looked nervous. But at this time, the Lord did not look nervous or uneasy. However, there was no nervousness or uneasiness on his face. On the contrary, there was an indescribable smile on his face. This smile seemed to show that he had grasped something. At this time, Luo Fan's face also showed a look of joy. In the midst of this joy, there was an inexplicable shock in his eyes. The Lord had grasped something, but he had also gained a lot. Although he had spent most of his time in the Tao discussion world to comprehend the Tao cultivated by the saint, and he had gained a lot, it was not as clear and direct as when he directly touched, clashed, and fused with his own Tao. At this moment, he saw the various changes between the absolute advantage and the absolute disadvantage of the Lord's Tao, and he finally knew the core of the Lord's Tao. The Lord's Tao had changed 10 times, and the first 9 times, he focused on one factor of his body. For example, the first Tao was to cultivate his body. The second Tao was to cultivate his strength. The third was to cultivate his godly soul. The fourth was to cultivate his aura. Just like that, all kinds of different kinds of cultivation methods were developed, and countless exquisite and indescribable magical powers were created. Even he felt that it was an eye-opener for him. He walked all the paths to the end, and finally reached the point where he could break through to the Saint Realm and finally obtain the Holy Decree. The 10th Tao that he was cultivating now was completely different from the previous 9 Tao of cultivation, but it was based on the previous 9 Tao of cultivation. On the other hand, he had completely integrated the 9 holy wills he had obtained from the previous 9 paths of cultivation into the 9 elements in his body. With the help of the holy wills, which had the characteristics of a saint, he worked hard to comprehend the mysteries of the saint realm. Then, he completely integrated the 9 elements and used their combined force to push his foundation into the saint realm. Such a Tao of cultivation, in theory, was extremely perfect. Theoretically, there was indeed a chance that he could really push himself to the sage realm. After all, the combination of the 9 Tao factors, including the physical body, strength, godly soul, aura, voice, and so on, would actually make a complete creature. If he could let these 9 Tao factors obtain the characteristics of a sage and then integrate them, wouldn't he also obtain the characteristics of a sage? In the end, as long as he took one more step forward, wouldn't he be equivalent to becoming a sage? Luo Fan had only come into contact with this step in the previous Tao discussion. He had only come into contact with the last step of integrating the 9 Tao factors, but he did not know the key to the final step of using the power of integration to step into the sage realm. This was also the core of the Lord's cultivation that Luo Fan had come into contact with. Mysterious, and wonderful. In this world, there is actually such an amazing person. Luo Fan could sense the Lord's thoughts about the last leap, and could not help but feel an inexplicable admiration. This last leap was based on the integration of the 9 holy decrees, and according to a complicated and mysterious method that was beyond the imagination of all living creatures. A mysterious formation was built, and the formation was finally activated. It directly swallowed a part of the chaotic state and integrated it into the divine body, and then transformed the body into a state that was like the chaotic state, and then obtained the power that was indestructible. It crossed the boundary between the immortal realm and the sage realm, and became a sage. This idea of integrating the chaotic state was something that Luo Fan had never thought about before. It could be said to be a kind of wonderful idea. When Luo Fan saw it, he felt an indescribable shock. One should know what the chaotic state was. That was a great existence that could evolve countless perfect worlds with just a tiny bit of it. Such an existence, even if it was Luo Fan. After seeing it, he would only have the thought of looking up to it. All he thought about was to be able to protect himself in the chaotic state and to be able to exist forever in the chaotic state. As for the idea of swallowing the chaotic state and integrating it into his own body, he did not even dare to think about it. However, the Lord in front of him dared to think about it. Just this kind of courage alone. It was already enough to shock him. However, what made him even more shocked was, not only did the Lord dare to think about it, but he also found a practical way to do it. It was a complicated and mysterious formation that he created based on the 9 holy decrees. According to the power that Luo Fan had deduced, it was really possible to swallow the chaotic state and integrate it into one's own body. If one dared to think about it, but did not have the ability to execute it, he would be a madman. If one dared to think about it, had the ability to execute it, and could come up with a way to achieve it, he would be a Superman. Luo Fan looked at the Lord in shock, and his heart suddenly had a very complicated feeling. The person in front of him was such a genius. Even though he had lost the most important key to becoming a sage, he could still create a way to become a sage that could almost be achieved. If he knew the key and knew that the most important thing to become a sage was to have a way that was completely suitable for him, or in other words, a worldview that was absolutely in line with his understanding of the world, would he not be able to become a sage very soon? What a pity! Luo Fan sighed again. In the past, Luo Fan had never thought that he would be so regretful and sigh because someone else could not become a sage. However, every time he saw a genius like the Lord who could not become a sage because of the key, he would always have such a regret and sigh. Suddenly, he had an inexplicable urge to tell the Lord about the key that formed his unique worldview. Fortunately, the urge came and went quickly. Telling him the key to his worldview was not a big deal to him. However, this matter was too crucial, too important. He would never reveal it to anyone who wasn't someone he could completely trust or have complete control over, especially the Lord in front of him. Although he admired him and was even shocked by his talent, their relationship was not good. How could he hand over such a powerful weapon if they had not reached that stage? After lamenting for a while, Luo Fan did not think about it anymore. He began to carefully understand the formation that the Lord had used the 9 elements and the 9 holy decrees to build. Although this was only a formation, the profoundness contained within it was profound and unfathomable to the extreme. It had already used all the characteristics of the 9 holy decrees to the extreme and dug out the potential of the holy decrees to the extreme. It had even analyzed the nature of the holy decrees so thoroughly that Luo Fan even felt that according to the method described, as long as there were the corresponding materials, he could even directly create the holy decrees. The preciousness and profoundness of such a formation could be imagined. It was no wonder that Luo Fan valued it so much. Just as Luo Fan was comprehending this incomparably wonderful array, the Holy Venerate was overjoyed. Luo Fan was able to discover the core of the Lord's cultivation through the changes in their cultivation. The Lord's ability was much stronger than Luo Fan's. How could he not have discovered it? At the moment when Luo Fan's auspicious cloud began to counterattack, the Lord had already discovered what he thought was the key to Luo Fan's cultivation. There's actually such a method. This person can actually create such a method. He's really a genius. I used to think that I'm already the smartest person in this world other than the saints. But I didn't expect that this person in front of me is even smarter than me and can actually come up with such a method. This must be the key that I'm missing in my cultivation. The reason why I failed to break through to the saint state 9 times must be because I'm missing this key. At this moment, the Lord only had such a thought in his mind. Luo Fan was shocked by the genius of the Lord. He was shocked by the fact that the Lord was able to open up such a mysterious cultivation method. However, he had forgotten that in the eyes of others, he was also a genius and a shocking existence. A little level 6 false sage could have the strength to participate in a level 9 false sage's Tao discussion. A level 6 false sage's Tao could stand out in the Tao discussion and surpass all the level 9 false sages. Moreover, at this time, he could even compete with the Lord, who had dominated the world for hundreds of millions of years. Such an existence must be a genius and a shocking existence. Who could be worthy of such an existence? The Lord had lived for hundreds of millions of years and had seen countless creatures, but he had never seen such an incredible existence like Luo Fan. With regards to Luo Fan's genius, he naturally had the most direct experience. At this moment, his evaluation of Luo Fan did not seem to be exaggerated at all. The way of cultivation is actually a way of cultivation that must be completely integrated with one's own body. It's actually a way of cultivation that needs to be fully integrated with one's own nature to be able to be fully activated. The Lord could not help but be shocked as he analyzed what he had discovered and the key to Luo Fan's cultivation. Possessing a unique and completely suitable worldview was the key to Luo Fan's cultivation. Luo Fan was well aware of this. If he revealed it, there would be no more secrets. However, although it was just a matter of a sentence, as long as it was revealed smoothly, there would be no secrets at all. However, before the truth was revealed, no one would have thought of this. It was also impossible to discover this from his path of cultivation. This was because it was just a concept. It was just like a person's thoughts. If two ordinary people were to stand opposite each other, and one of them wanted to know what the other was thinking, it would be impossible to tell just by looking. Even if the person who wanted to know what the other was thinking was extremely observant and could discover some of the other's thoughts from the clues revealed by the other person, it was very likely that there would be some misunderstandings in the end, which would cause the result to be completely different from what the other person really thought. Right now, it was like this. The Lord was analyzing the various manifestations of Luo Fan's Tao to find the key to Luo Fan's cultivation. It was just like an ordinary person trying to analyze another person's psychological activities through their behavior. In the case of a complete lack of concept, the result of his analysis could only be the opposite. It was impossible for him to find out that the key to Luo Fan's cultivation was his worldview. In the end, what he got was only the concrete manifestation of his worldview. In other words, it was the most subtle manifestation. However, if Luo Fan knew that the Lord had analyzed his Tao of the Fruit of Wei and treated everything about him as a part of the Tao of the Fruit of Wei, he would have admired the Lord even more if he had combined everything about him with the Tao of the Fruit of Wei to form a complete cultivation path. This was because after he sorted out his unique worldview, he had already changed his nature to the worldview of laws as the foundation through time and time again of cultivation. He had transformed everything about him into a form of existence that was in line with the worldview of laws. When this was combined with the Tao Fruit Tao that he'd created based on his worldview of laws, it caused everything in his body to form a strange connection with his Tao Fruit Tao, causing the foundation between the two, or rather, the foundation, to become the same essence. This essence, coupled with the fact that his great way of the fruits of ways had completely fused with his body, resulted in his current state. It seemed like everything he had was a part of the great way of the fruits of ways, and the great way of the fruits of ways needed to fuse with everything he had in order to be considered a complete cultivation path. Chapter 1424. Of course, the Lord's goal was only the tip of the iceberg of the essence of Luo Fan's cultivation. If the Lord were to continue on this path, he would definitely be able to go further than what he was currently cultivating. However, it was also impossible for him to become a true saint. It was like an ordinary person who did not know how a computer worked. He had studied the appearance of a computer countless times, and even used it to the point where he could draw the outline of the computer even if he closed his eyes. He could even simulate all the interfaces and functions of the computer when it was working. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to use such a method to create a real computer. At this moment, the Lord was in such a situation. Even if he could discover the many details of Luo Fan's unique view of the world, it was just like an ordinary person who had a thorough understanding of the working interfaces of a computer. He could not understand the real principles behind it, so it was impossible for him to understand the essence. Even if he used his own methods to simulate such changes, it would only be similar on the surface. It was impossible for him to understand the real mystery. Luo Fan was very clear about this. However, the Lord did not know. After discovering that everything about Luo Fan was a part of the great Tao of the way that he cultivated, and that the two were inseparable and had a mutually separate relationship, his heart was filled with indescribable joy. In a trance, he even had a feeling that he had achieved enlightenment. The illusory door of the saint had slowly opened in front of him. Under such a feeling, his body began to emit an indescribable joy. He was a supreme venerable who possessed 9 types of holy wills. The contagious power of this joyful aura could even affect inanimate objects. In an instant, the entire Cloud Sea world seemed to have become extremely joyful. In a trance, all the living creatures in the Cloud Sea world naturally sensed this indescribable joy. Everyone could not help but reveal a faint smile on their faces. However, Luo Fan did not care about the Lord's mood at this moment. At this moment, he was wholeheartedly trying to understand the last step of the Lord's cultivation. It was the complicated and mysterious array that was constructed by using 9 holy decrees that could swallow the chaotic state. As he comprehended this, the auspicious cloud above his head faintly received some sort of blessing. However, the speed of the erosion and assimilation of the magic cloud above the Lord's head was beyond imagination. Initially, it took a long time for the cloud to be eroded to such a state. However, in less than 2 hours, it had already eroded the cloud above the holy venerable's head. Only the last 10% of the cloud was still colorful. The rest of the cloud had already been covered by the chaotic color. It was as if the auspicious clouds of the Lord had suddenly dissipated. If it was before, the bookmaster and the others would have been extremely worried and uneasy seeing such a change. But at this moment, the Cloud Sea world was filled with a strange sense of joy. However, they didn't have any such emotions at all. On the contrary, there was an indescribable joy. Indescribable joy. However, at this point, the magic cloud above Luo Fan's head had already reached the limit of its influence on the Holy Senior Magic Cloud. Although the Lord's cultivation lacked the most important factor, he was a genius after all. However, he was, after all, a genius who had spent countless billions of years of cultivation and walked on 10 different paths. He would always be able to obtain some mysteries that could truly approach the way of a saint. These were not things that Luo Fan's current great Tao of the way could corrode and assimilate. Such a change was in a stalemate at this point. The Lord could not turn the auspicious cloud around, and Luo Fan could not let his cloud erode the last 10% of the auspicious cloud. It was just like, the difference between the two was just like that. Such a process lasted for a few months. During this process, both Luo Fan and the Lord did not have any intention to stop. They both found the mystery that they needed to carefully understand from each other. Not to mention that it was only a few months, even if it continued for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Both of them would not have any objection. However, the time dimension here was completely different from the Devil Kingdom. The flow of time here was many times slower than the flow of time in the Devil Kingdom. Perhaps thousands or tens of thousands of years had passed here, but hundreds of millions of years had passed in the Devil Kingdom. Therefore, however, it was impossible for the two of them to continue delaying like this. Several months later, when both of them believed that they had memorized each other's mysteries and were only waiting for the next day to continue comprehending them, the two of them tacitly retracted the auspicious clouds above their heads and withdrew the cultivation paths that they had fully manifested. As they concealed it, the two auspicious clouds above them slowly separated and returned to the top of their heads. When all of this was done, Both of them opened their eyes at the same time. Although there was a distance between them, their eyes met at the same time. In an instant, both of them looked at each other and smiled. Their smiles were full of satisfaction and joy. The Lord bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you, my friend. If my cultivation is successful in the future, it's all thanks to you." Luo Fan quickly returned the gesture and said, "You're too polite, my friend. I've also learned a lot of cultivation mysteries from you that I've never seen before. It's a win-win situation for both of us." The Lord chuckled and raised his hand. In an instant, thousands of level 9 pseudo-divine treasures appeared above his head. These are the treasures that I've refined since I started cultivating. I need to go into seclusion to break through to the sage realm, so these treasures are no longer useful to me. I originally wanted to give them to all of you directly, but the treasures are different, and everyone has different needs. If I just casually distribute them, I won't be able to satisfy everyone. Therefore, I've decided to hold a treasure-seizing assembly here. Whichever treasures you're interested in will depend on your own abilities. At this point, he suddenly paused and said to Luo Fan, "During this Tao discussion, my friend has made up for the key that I've missed in my cultivation, so I have to repay you." As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved it. Among the thousands of level 9 pseudo-divine treasures that appeared above his head, 81 of them separated and turned into streams of light that directly landed on the platform in front of Luo Fan. Looking at these treasures, Luo Fan was stunned. However, he could clearly feel it. Although these 81 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures were not the most powerful ones among the thousands of treasures, they were the treasures that existed among them that corresponded to the 9 holy wills that the Lord had cultivated. Among them, each holy will corresponded to 9 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures. Among them, each holy will corresponded to 9 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures. In this way, there were as many as 81 treasures. Such treasures might not be of much use in the hands of others. However, for Luo Fan, who had already comprehended many of the mysteries of the Holy Senior's Tao, it allowed him to barely replace the 9 holy wills and slightly display a portion of the power of the formation that could devour the primordial chaos. Luo Fan found it impossible to refuse such a set of 81 magical treasures. With a sigh, he raised his hand and waved, and the 81 treasures were directly put into his universe in his sleeve. Then he bowed to the Lord and said, "Thank you for the treasures, fellow Holy Lord." The Lord saw the treasures in Luo Fan's hands. He seemed to be relieved, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "These are just some small things. Compared to what you have given me, these are not worth mentioning at all." Luo Fan smiled bitterly. At this moment, he suddenly had the urge to tell the Lord about the key to cultivation related to the world. However, his Taoist heart was firm after all. Nevertheless, he still resisted the urge. "It's still not enough. I'm still not willing to say it out like this." Luo Fan sighed in his heart. For an existence like Luo Fan, it was the most basic concept to listen to one's heart. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that his heart was not willing. So naturally, he would not do anything that he was unwilling to do, even if it seemed that he should be doing it. Therefore, to the Lord, Luo Fan could only apologize. However, the Lord did not pay much attention to Luo Fan. Just as he said, even though there were a lot of these magic treasures, they were meaningless to him. Abandoning these treasures would instead make it easier for him to break through to the sage realm. He handed 81 of them to Luo Fan. To him, it was not a big deal at all. After handing the treasures to Luo Fan, he raised his hand and clapped. A world appeared in front of him. Then he raised his hand, and the thousands of treasures flowed like a river. They directly merged into that world and entered the bodies of various creatures born in that world. They were directly reincarnated into strange creatures. In the blink of an eye, they turned into a state that could not be seen at a glance after that. The Lord raised his hand and touched that world. In an instant, the flow of time in that world suddenly sped up by many times. In the blink of an eye, the shape of the world changed drastically. The creatures in it had evolved for billions of generations. The treasures that were originally reincarnated into those creatures had completely integrated with the creatures in that world during the process. Even those who remembered the locations of the treasures would not be able to find the reincarnation of those treasures. Many of the cultivators in the Cloud Sea world had a look of regret on their faces when they realized this. Before this, they did not feel much about the Lord directly giving 81 treasures to Luo Fan. Not to mention that Luo Fan seemed to have given the Lord a great reminder during the discussion just now, which allowed him to gain a lot. There were thousands of treasures here. If they were to be divided equally, each of them would be able to get more than 10 treasures. If someone was luckier, it would not be a big problem to get more than 100 treasures. Under such circumstances, seeing that Luo Fan had obtained a magic treasure that was not the most powerful one, they naturally would not have any strange reactions. Their thoughts were simple. However, at this moment, when they realized that the Lord had actually hidden those treasures in such a state in that world, they finally had a very strong sense of envy for Luo Fan. Those treasures have become so difficult to find. It might not be difficult for anyone to get one or two, but it will be quite difficult to get more. On the other hand, Luo Fan did not have to do anything. He did not even have to enter the world to get the treasures, but he could get 81 treasures. How could they feel good about such a difference? The Lord waited until the thousands of level 9 pseudo-saint treasures in that world were completely hidden and there was no longer any strange signs coming out. Only then did he stop the amazing time acceleration. He gradually stabilized the world and maintained the flow of time to be about 10,000 times faster than the outside world. After that, he raised his hand and tossed the world directly into the sea of clouds below and expanded crazily. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had completely merged with the sea of clouds below. The sea of clouds below had completely turned into a vast, boundless, and extremely complete boundless universe. This kind of structure made the sea of clouds look like the sky of that world, as well as the clouds above the sky of that world, but it looked extremely strange. When the world below had completely merged with the sea of clouds, the Lord smiled. If you guys are interested in getting the treasures, please go down and see what the opportunities are. Many cultivators in this world of clouds looked at each other and bowed to the Lord, saying, "Thank you, Senior Lord, for the treasures." As they spoke, they turned into streams of light and rushed into those worlds. In the blink of an eye, only the holy venerable Luo Fan and Kai Fuzi were left on the platform above the sea of clouds. The others, including the venerable book and the others, were all gone. The others, including the book venerable, had already rushed into the world below to search for the reincarnations of those treasures. Brother Luo Fan, why don't you go and see what the opportunities are? Seeing that Luo Fan did not go down, the Lord smiled and asked, "Forget it. I'm already very satisfied with the 81 treasures that you gave me. I don't need to compete with other friends for the opportunities anymore." Luo Fan smiled. After laughing, he said to Kai Fuzi, who was beside him, "You don't have to worry about me. If you want to go down and search. No matter what treasures you find, they are yours." Kai Fuzi was originally eager to try, but because Luo Fan, whom he was attached to, did not move, it was not good for him to act alone. Hearing what Luo Fan said at this moment, Kai Fuzi was very excited. Why would he be polite? He immediately bowed to the Lord and then to Luo Fan. Turning around, he turned into a stream of light and rushed into the world of clouds below. The speed at which he rushed down was much faster than the other cultivators. After all, he felt that he was already one step behind the others. If he didn't speed up, he wouldn't be able to catch up. If he did not speed up, it would be difficult for him to catch up with them and obtain the real treasures. One should know that the time flow in the world below was tens of thousands of times faster than here. Just now, he had only wasted a little time, but a few months might have passed in the world below. For those who were lucky, this period of time was enough for them to obtain dozens of treasures. Luo Fan looked down at the various things in the world below and could not help but admire it. The confinement effect of this world is so strong. My friends can only exert the strength of a rogue immortal when they enter. It has to be so. My friends are too strong. If there is no confinement, this world of mine will not be able to hold on for long. You said it would be destroyed in an instant. The Lord laughed. While smiling, the Lord suddenly thought of something and said to Luo Fan, I see that your cultivation is so profound. Why are you still a level 6 pseudo-sage and not a level 9 pseudo-sage? Luo Fan smiled and said, I've only recently comprehended this path of cultivation, so I haven't been cultivating for a long time. It's already the result of many fortuitous encounters that I'm able to reach the level 6 pseudo-divine realm. It is not possible to become a level 9 pseudo-sage in a short period of time. I see. I didn't expect you to be such a genius. I have cultivated for tens of thousands of years, and I have even refined thousands of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. Only then did I manage to create such a cultivation method with great disadvantages. You have only cultivated for such a short period of time, but you have already created such a Tao. It is really admirable. The Lord sighed. Luo Fan shook his head and said with a smile, Haha, why do you have to belittle yourself? The fact that I can create this Tao is the result of many coincidences. How can I be compared to you, who has cultivated step by step to where you are now? Now that you have obtained this key, I believe that you will soon surpass me in the Tao of cultivation. The Lord just shook his head and sighed. It is difficult. The Tao that I have cultivated has already penetrated into my bones. It is extremely difficult to change it. I am afraid that I will need to spend hundreds of millions of years to adjust. It is a pity that this flowing light world, even the Saint Venerables would not consider a few 100 million years as a short period of time. If he were to cultivate in this flowing light world where the flow of time was much slower than the outside world, how many years would it take for him to adjust to the outside world? Would it be a few trillion years or a few 100 million years? If it was a normal time, it would not be a big deal. The Lord did not think that he could not afford to waste such a long time. However, at this time, he could faintly feel that a storm was coming, and it seemed that a major change was about to happen. How could he waste such a long time on adjusting his own Tao of cultivation? Therefore, of course, he could not adjust his own Tao of cultivation in this time dimension, which was also in this flowing light world. He had to return to the devil realm to do this. It was because of this that he showed such an expression towards this flowing light world. Obviously, Luo Fan understood the Lord's mentality very well. He looked around and sighed. It is indeed a pity. This flowing light world simulates the chaotic time dimension. It is an extremely mysterious place. If one were to cultivate here for a long time, it would definitely be very beneficial to understand the chaos. This was his real thought. If a cultivator could be in the same time dimension as the state of chaos, he would naturally be able to obtain a perspective that was on par with the state of chaos. Looking at the state of chaos from that perspective and understanding the state of chaos would be completely different from the perspective of a normal cultivator at this moment. He would be able to directly change from the original one-sided perspective to a real comprehensive perspective. In that case, it would still be difficult to understand the state of chaos. However, what he would understand would be closer to the reality of the state of chaos, and it would be closer to the essence of the state of chaos. Of course, this would only be possible if one was in the same time dimension as the state of chaos. Although the flowing light world in front of him had a trace of the time dimension that simulated the state of chaos, it was not the time dimension of the state of chaos. Although it could bring a lot of benefits to understand the state of chaos. However, it could not achieve the effect of changing the nature of the state of chaos. Compared to slowing down the time, it was not worth it. After the Lord heard Luo Fan's words, his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked at Luo Fan from head to toe. After a long time, he then exclaimed, I didn't expect you to know about the time dimension of chaos. It was only after I obtained the holy decree for the 9th time that I comprehended this point and opened up this flowing light world. Compared to fellow Taoists, I find that I've lived my entire life like a dog. I am ashamed. It was only by chance that I realized it. Luo Fan only smiled. The Lord laughed. Shaking his head, he stood up and said to Luo Fan, "In the past, there were tens of thousands of level 9 venerable ones who entered my flowing light world, but none of them discovered the mystery of this flowing light world. You are the first. This is not something that can be explained by chance." As he spoke, he raised his hand and clapped. A multicolored space-time tunnel appeared in the void, leading to an unknown location. After the tunnel was formed, the Lord said, "I don't know if you are interested in going with me to see the core of this flowing light world." When Luo Fan heard this, his eyes lit up and said, "Of course, I dare not ask." As he spoke, he also stood up and took a light step forward, coming to the side of the Lord. The Lord laughed and said, "Please." Then, he took a light step forward and stepped into the space-time tunnel with Luo Fan. This tunnel was not very long, and the place it led to was also in this flowing light world. However, it led to a place that was hidden very deeply, and no one knew where it was. Whether it was Luo Fan or the Lord, both of them were not ordinary cultivators. Soon, both of them crossed the tunnel and came to the place that the tunnel led to. When he saw the place that the tunnel led to, Luo Fan could not help but narrow his eyes, and there was an indescribable shock in his eyes. This was because this was an extremely strange space, a space that simulated the state of chaos. In this space, there was a kind of gray, strange existence that seemed to be in a state of chaos. These gray existences were formed by the 4 basic existences of time, space, matter, and energy, which were mixed together in an extremely chaotic and mysterious way. They seemed to be tumbling endlessly in this seemingly endless space in front of him, changing endlessly. It was like the state of chaos outside of this world. They actually recreated chaos here. Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind, and the shock in his eyes was even more obvious. He was not shocked by anything else, but the way this simulated state of chaos was formed. Chapter 1425. For a level 9 pseudo-saint, even if he was an utmost exalted one, to be able to build something that was extremely similar to the state of chaos from scratch and simulate the state of chaos, one could imagine how deep his understanding of the state of chaos must be. For Luo Fan, who was painstakingly comprehending the state of chaos in order to use its mysteries to enrich and complete his worldview, it was self-evident how shocking it was. This simulated state of chaos was built by the Lord, so it was naturally under his absolute control. The space-time tunnel that the Lord opened did not lead to the edge of the simulated state of chaos. Instead, it led directly to the depths of the simulated state of chaos in the void. At this moment, the Lord and Luo Fan were standing at the exit of the tunnel. Naturally, they were in the simulated state of chaos. However, the surroundings were gray. The simulated state of chaos that was mixed with the 4 basic existences of time, space, matter, and energy in a very special way seemed to be pushed away by an invisible force. Naturally, a spherical area of vacuum appeared, wrapping Luo Fan and the Lord within it. This is the core of the flowing light world. The Lord looked at the simulated state of chaos and sighed. "I can't believe that you are able to build such an existence that simulates the state of chaos. I am not as good as you." Luo Fan sighed. "It's just a coincidence." The Lord smiled. This was what Luo Fan had said a few times before. At this moment, the Lord used it to answer Luo Fan, which made him feel a little strange. "When I first created the path of cultivation, I once built a formation to absorb some of the chaos. However, when I first absorbed the chaos, the formation was not perfect. The primal chaos that was sucked in quickly lost its primal chaos form and transformed into all sorts of worlds. Later on, I used this transformation process in reverse, and only then was I barely able to construct this simulated chaos before me. Unfortunately, after all, I am not a sage. The simulated chaos that I built is still very different from the real chaos. Fortunately, this has already revealed the deep nature of the time dimension of the chaos. This is also an unexpected gain." "I see. I didn't expect you to discover the deep nature of the time dimension of the chaos in this way," Luo Fan exclaimed. After discovering this, I understood that this dimension of time must be the deepest secret of the chaos. Therefore, I built this flowing light world. I wanted to understand the mystery of the chaos in this world. Unfortunately, the dimension of time is too difficult to control. Even though I built the simulated chaos, the final deduction of the dimension of time is still very different from the time dimension of the chaos. To be able to deduce such a dimension of time is already an achievement that no one has ever achieved before. Even if you're not satisfied, I will be ashamed to death. I would be ashamed to death, Luo Fan helplessly sighed. The Lord only smiled helplessly when he heard that. He didn't continue on this topic. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. In an instant, the simulated primal chaos underwent a strange transformation. Time, space, matter, and energy suddenly underwent a huge change. The chaos that originally existed completely disappeared at this moment. What replaced it was an indescribable order. What was replaced was an indescribable order. This order was only roughly formed. But soon, this order developed naturally, allowing the four basic existences to gradually build a complete world. This world was extremely primitive. All the elements in the world were initially separated. Everything, energy, and even time, space, and everything else were in the state when the world was first created. Waves of chaotic aura faintly pervaded the air, and there were all sorts of extremely powerful and mysterious connate life forms evolving in this world. The Lord sighed as he looked at the world that was naturally formed by the four basic existences. This simulation of chaos is the only thing that is useful now. It contains the evolution of chaos and the profound meaning of heaven and earth. Such a world, every time we separate, it will be different. Luo Fan looked at this primitive world and guessed. That's right. That's right. If it's the same every time, what's the use? The Lord said. Luo Fan listened and exclaimed, I see. If that's the case, isn't it possible to know how the chaos transformed into the world through this evolution process? If that's the case, wouldn't he be able to learn how the primal chaos transformed into a world through this evolution process? The Lord sighed. Although this place is quite mysterious, it's still very complicated. The Lord sighed. Although this place is quite mysterious, it is not the only thing that can be found here. Originally, I thought that this place might contain the mysteries of the saints, but now it seems that although it is mysterious, it is not very useful for real cultivation. I've really wasted too much time here. It felt like the flow of time was billions of times faster than the time dimension that Luo Fan and the Lord were in. It felt like the flow of time was billions of times faster than the time dimension where Luo Fan and the Lord were at, in the time it took for the two of them to exchange a few words. That world had already developed to its limit, and the numerous living beings that existed in it had finally completely shattered this extremely wondrous world after countless battles. As the world was broken, the four basic existences lost their order again and recombined into a form that simulated the state of chaos. When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, did you not notice it just now? The Lord was shocked and could not help but ask, What did you notice? Through the previous indirect and direct discussion, the Lord was already very convinced of Luo Fan's ability. This time, he brought him here not only to make friends with Luo Fan, but also to see what Luo Fan thought about the structure of his own world. Now that Luo Fan had suddenly said these words, his heart was instantly filled with an inexplicable doubt and surprise. Could it be that this person really saw something that I haven't seen? That's impossible. I've simulated the world derived from chaos for tens of thousands of times, but I've never seen anything special. He's only seen it once. How could he see anything special? Amidst his anticipation and surprise, the Lord had this thought in his mind. Luo Fan smiled and said, My friend, let's simulate the world of chaos again so that it's easier to distinguish. This was obviously a very small matter to the Lord, so naturally, he would not reject it. He immediately raised his hand and gently waved. In an instant, the gray state of chaos was naturally divided, and order was added to the original chaos. Under this order, a completely different process of the birth of heaven and earth suddenly appeared. In an instant, a world appeared in front of both of them. This world, although it was also derived from the simulated state of chaos, and even the Lord's method was not much different from before. However, the final result was completely different. Although the appearance of the world that was derived was still primitive, it was no longer the same as before. Both of them were essentially the same, but they had completely different mysteries. After the Lord had simulated the state of chaos and derived such a world, he looked at Luo Fan with a puzzled look on his face. Obviously, he wanted Luo Fan to explain why he had to do this, and why there was such a mystery. Luo Fan did not open his mouth. He just paid attention to the evolution of this world. At this time, the time flow of the world that was created was also the same as before. It seemed to be billions of times more time than both of them. Very soon, the world began to break away from the primitive and wild. Civilization gradually appeared in this world. Of course, this civilization was not something that Luo Fan had never seen before. Even the Lord, who had repeated this process tens of thousands of times, had never seen it before, and the speed of the civilization was extremely fast. Very soon, many unimaginable powerhouses were born. Nobody knew how many inexplicable battles were born. The number of powerhouses increased, and the battles became more and more intense. At a certain moment, Luo Fan suddenly said, "This is the time. My friend, let's go in and save this world." When the Lord heard this, he was extremely puzzled as to why Luo Fan wanted to do this. After all, he was more curious and wanted to see what Luo Fan wanted to do. Immediately, he nodded and pointed with his finger. Then, together with Luo Fan, they rushed into the world with two thoughts. The flow of time in that world was simply too fast. It was so fast that even the moment they entered, they felt that their own thoughts had suffered a terrifying impact. They felt as if they were about to be completely destroyed by the horrifying difference in the flow of time. Fortunately, the Lord's thoughts had been integrated with the holy decree, so it was almost eternal and indestructible. Needless to say, Luo Fan was even more so. He had already understood the meaning of the holy decree, which was not the holy decree, so his own thoughts were naturally inseparable from this meaning. Under such circumstances, although their thoughts were under the terrifying pressure of the huge time dimension jump, they still managed to withstand it in the end. They successfully descended into that world and became two of the most powerful beings in that world. When they descended into such a world, the time dimension of their thoughts was naturally affected by this world. The world that they saw in their eyes was naturally like a normal world. The creatures in this world were somewhat different from those born with Taoism aptitude, but they generally had a human form. Therefore, the living beings formed from their intents also had a rough humanoid shape. After entering this world, the Lord first looked at Luo Fan, wanting him to explain what was going on. When he looked at Luo Fan and saw the strange smile on Luo Fan's face, he was slightly stunned. Then, he sensed slightly, and an indescribable shock appeared on his face. "This is the catastrophe of the world," the Lord murmured. His eyes became brighter and brighter, and the divine light in his eyes became more and more obvious. In the past, he did not think much of this world. As for the process of the world's evolution to the end of its natural collapse, he only thought that it was a very natural change, just like how ordinary people would grow old and die of illness. At most, he could only sense the changes of the world from outside the world, but he had never personally stepped into the world to personally sense the specific changes of the world. Under such circumstances, sensing the changes of the world was naturally separated by a layer, and it was impossible for him to discover the extremely fast and extremely subtle changes that occurred in the process of the world's destruction. At this time, under the guidance of Luo Fan, his thoughts entered the world, and only then did he discover a truth that he had not discovered before. The destruction of the world was actually not a natural process. Instead, it was the deep test of the perfect world, and the root cause of the destruction of countless perfect worlds the catastrophe of the world. The simulated chaos here has already been created by me into this world. What caused the catastrophe of the world? After discovering the catastrophe of the world, the Lord was puzzled. After all, he had lived for such a long time, so he naturally had some understanding of the catastrophe of the world. He also had a vague guess about the nature of the catastrophe of the world. He knew about the catastrophe of the world. It was some kind of test that the state of chaos carried out for the world that existed in it. As long as one passed through the catastrophe of the world would obtain great benefits. If it could not pass through the catastrophe of the world, the final outcome would be the complete destruction of the world. This was the best outcome. It was also the collapse of the world, the extinction of all living things, and finally, only ruins would be left. The nature of the catastrophe of the world required the existence of the state of chaos around the world in order for it to exist. Such a nature was for the world that was created to simulate the state of chaos where he was now. There must be an existence that simulated the state of chaos around it. However, this contradicted the current situation. Right now, his simulated state of chaos had clearly been completely transformed by him into this world. Outside of this world, how could there be any simulated state of chaos? If there was no simulated state of chaos, how could there be a catastrophe of the world? This contradiction made the Lord puzzled for a while. In the end, it was Luo Fan who revealed the mystery. He said, "The catastrophe of the world was not created by the simulation of chaos. It was created by the real chaos." Hearing this, the Lord's mind was opened, and various thoughts flashed through his mind. In a trance, he had already understood the truth of the matter, and his face could not help but show an indescribable surprise. I see. I actually almost missed this opportunity," the Lord murmured, and the divine light in his eyes became brighter and more dazzling. In the end, it was even like two searchlights cutting through the void. It caused the surrounding time and space to be slightly distorted. As Luo Fan looked at the Lord's behavior, the impulse to tell him about the world's view of the world had completely disappeared. 81 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures and the possibility of surpassing the perfect world should be able to make up for it. He thought to himself, but his expression was much more relaxed. After all, Luo Fan had helped the untainted world survive to catastrophe of the world in the untainted world. His understanding of the catastrophe of the world was many times better than that of the Lord. Even though the Lord had lived for a long time, he had some necessary understanding of the catastrophe of the world. However, don't forget that the Devil Realm itself was created by the accumulation of the residual power of the catastrophe of the world. Even if he had some understanding of the catastrophe of the world, how could he have personally experienced it? That kind of understanding was like an armchair strategist. It was like an armchair strategist. How could it compare to Luo Fan, who had personally experienced the great calamity of the world? Therefore, he understood the fact that the Lord had never discovered it. He knew that the destruction of the world was not a natural law at all, but the influence of the catastrophe of the world. When he knew that the catastrophe of the world actually existed in the world that was created in the simulated state of chaos, Luo Fan already understood the true value of the world. The catastrophe of the world could not have come from the simulated state of chaos. If it was not the simulated state of chaos, it could only come from another greater and more incredible existence, the state of chaos. As for the reason, Luo Fan also understood the reason after thinking for a while. This had to be seen from the source of the simulated state of chaos. The source of the simulated state of chaos was the real state of chaos. In the beginning, the Lord had swallowed a bit of the real state of chaos. In the end, after the state of chaos had naturally divided, he had taken a step back and deduced the many things that were divided from the state of chaos into the simulated state of chaos. And now, the simulated state of chaos had been created by the Lord into a world. The whole process was simplified a little, and the truth was revealed. The state of chaos had divided and turned into the simulated state of chaos, and the simulated state of chaos had turned into a world. Obviously, This world was simply a world that was directly evolved from the state of chaos. In essence, there was no difference at all from the Earth universe, the primitive world, the Great Tianyuan world, and the Xianyang world. As for the division of the state of chaos, the simulation of chaos, and then the evolution of the world, the whole process could actually be regarded as a special way to open up a world. From this point of view, it was obvious that this world could receive the favor of the catastrophe of the world. It could cause the catastrophe of the world to descend at any time from the state of chaos. It was really normal. The way this world was created was fundamentally different from the way it was created directly in the state of chaos. This made this world no different from a perfect world in essence. But in terms of level, it was a world of difference compared to a perfect world like the primitive world. This world had evolved and been reborn tens of thousands of times, but none of them had been able to withstand the first catastrophe of the world. Every time it died in the catastrophe of the world, it could be seen how weak it was. However, for the saint, the strength or weakness of this world did not matter at all. What he needed was the characteristic of this world that could be favored by the catastrophe of the world that was derived from the state of chaos. And this characteristic was the real value of this world in Luo Fan's eyes. The great tribulation of heaven and earth was dangerous to any perfect world. It was also an opportunity. If it could not survive the catastrophe of the world, the perfect world would naturally suffer huge losses and might even collapse directly. However, if it could survive the catastrophe of the world would naturally obtain endless benefits. If it could be lucky enough to survive the 9 catastrophe of the world would evolve into an incredible world. From then on, there would be no disasters or tribulations. It would never be destroyed. From then on, it would no longer be restrained by the state of chaos. There would no longer be a need to worry that it would disappear at any moment and completely destroy the living beings in it. And this world obviously belonged to the saint. Therefore, for the saint, as long as he could help this world survive the catastrophe of the world, it would be equivalent to directly owning a world. From then on, he would no longer be bound by the earth or the demon realm. He would be able to live freely in the state of chaos and obtain eternal time to pursue becoming a saint. In fact, he would not even need to pursue becoming a saint in this world. In this world, he could live eternally. Obviously, one could imagine the value of this world. The Lord was a genius who could even create a way of cultivation that shocked even Luo Fan. After knowing that the world in front of him could actually attract the great trial of heaven and earth that was derived from the state of chaos, how could he not know the nature of the world? How could he not know the value of the world? It was also because he knew this that he was so excited at this moment. He was so happy. It's just that this world is so weak. This catastrophe of the world is really not easy to survive. Suddenly, the excited saint thought of something. There was a helpless look on his face. This kind of helplessness was only a little bit at first, but as time went by, it became more and more intense. In the end, it even became an indescribable kind of annoyance. Just now, he had clearly seen an almost absolute opportunity to become a saint. With a large world of his own, he would naturally be able to obtain endless time, and with the accumulation of such time, he would naturally be able to become a saint after endless years. But now, he immediately discovered that this opportunity to become a saint was actually an illusion, as if there was no chance of it being realized at all. How could he keep his calm? It would be fine if there was no such opportunity. Suddenly, he was given hope, and then it was taken away. The impact on his soul was really unimaginable. Even though the saint's heart was unimaginably strong and perfect, when it came to the important point of becoming a saint, he had to behave like a normal person. Although the saint was only here with his consciousness itself had already surpassed the limit of this world by many times. At this moment, his annoyance caused the whole world to shake violently. The weather that was impossible to unify in this vast and boundless world suddenly became unified under his mood. The entire world became extremely gloomy, as if the entire sky was covered by dark clouds. It was more like the sky was constantly falling, as if it was going to completely destroy and erase everything in this world. Chapter 14:26. The difficulty of the tribulation of heaven and earth increased gradually. The first few tribulation of heaven and earth were not too difficult. Back then, Luo Fan was only an earth immortal, but he had successfully survived the first tribulation of heaven and earth in the untainted world. After that, although he had improved a lot during the second tribulation of heaven and earth, he was still at the level of an ant. However, he had survived it safely, and the untainted world had obtained endless benefits. Under such circumstances, it was obviously not difficult for the Lord, who is an unimaginably powerful venerable, to help this world survive through the great tribulation of heaven and earth a few times. The interval between each tribulation of heaven and earth was constantly increasing. At first, it might only be a few million years. Later on, it might even take hundreds of millions of trillion years or even hundreds of billions of trillion years to come again. Such a long time was obviously enough for an unimaginably powerful venerable like the Lord to find a way to survive the tribulation of heaven and earth. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the Lord's expression gradually calmed down. Countless rays of divine light flashed in his eyes. After a while, he sighed, bowed to Luo Fan, and said, "Thank you for reminding me, fellow Taoist." Seeing that he understood, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Even if I don't remind you, you will definitely be able to figure it out very quickly. Now that the first tribulation of heaven and earth is right in front of us, let's deal with it first." Hearing this, the Lord said, "That's right. I still need your help in this tribulation of heaven and earth." Of course, Luo Fan was also quite interested in the tribulation of heaven and earth, but at this moment he smiled and said, after the agreement was made, the two of them began to carefully observe the world in front of them. Currently, the entire world had already reached its final juncture. All the living beings in the world seemed to have been enveloped by some strange, baleful aura, and their natures seemed to have been shrouded. Although everyone's mind was not blinded, they still had their original wisdom and spiritual intelligence. However, this wisdom, this spiritual intelligence was now all for destruction. For destruction, Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable were extremely sharp. Naturally, they could tell that under the guidance of the great trial of heaven and earth, countless opportunities were being created, leading the countless living beings to the final outcome of the complete destruction of the world. This world had evolved over countless years. The current cultivation system was already extremely perfect. Although there were many differences between it and the normal cultivation system, it had also nurtured countless existences that were comparable to the sage-to-be. To Luo Fan and the Lord, such an existence was naturally weak. They might not even be able to withstand the gaze of their real bodies. However, he already had the power to completely destroy this world. The only reason why this world had not been destroyed was because he still had some rationality and could still control himself. However, this was only temporary. Under the guidance of the great tribulation of the heavens and earth, they would definitely advance towards the state of complete destruction in the end. In the end, the world would be destroyed. It was almost inevitable if Luo Fan and the Lord did not intervene. To survive the great trial of heaven and earth, it was obviously impossible to just stop these sage-to-be. Unless they stayed here and suppressed all the living beings in this world forever so that they could not destroy the world. Otherwise, even if they stopped one group of living beings, another group of living beings would appear and destroy the world. Therefore, what the Lord and Luo Fan needed to do was to trigger the great trial of heaven and earth and ignite all the living beings in this world so that they could fight against each other. In the process, they would try their best to ensure that the world would not be destroyed. Only when the great trial of heaven and earth was burned out in all the battles and the world became clear again would the first great trial of heaven and earth be considered past. The great trial of heaven and earth is much stronger than the normal great trial of heaven and earth. Luo Fan realized the great trial of heaven and earth and had such a thought in his mind. The Lord had never seen the real great trial of heaven and earth, so he did not feel anything. He only thought that the real great trial of heaven and earth was like this. However, as Luo Fan, who had experienced several great trial of heaven and earth in the primitive world, he knew very well that the first great trial of heaven and earth would not be very difficult. Not to mention that one would need the power of a sage-to-be to get through it. As long as one had the power of a primordial unity, one would almost certainly be able to get through it. Therefore, he was sure that this great trial of heaven and earth was extremely abnormal. It was many times stronger than the normal great trial of heaven and earth. Of course, he would not mention this to the Lord, considering how much the Lord valued this world. Mentioning this would only cause his Taoist heart to be shaken, and it would not bring him any benefits. He was only thinking about the reason for such a change in the great trial of heaven and earth. No matter how he thought about it, he could only think that it was because the foundation of this world was not strong enough. A normal perfect world must be directly created in the state of chaos by an existence that was at least in the saint realm or even beyond the saint realm. Once it existed, it could already exist eternally in the state of chaos. It only needed to be afraid of the great trial of heaven and earth, and there was nothing else to worry about. Although the foundation of this world was in the state of chaos, it was only created by the Lord. Although he was powerful, he was only a venerable one and not a saint. Moreover, after it was created, it needed to exist in the perfect world of the earth, and it could not directly come into contact with the state of chaos. In comparison, the foundation of such a world was thousands of times worse than the real perfect world. With such a gap, even if it was a normal great trial of heaven and earth, it would be many times more difficult than the world. After understanding this, Luo Fan could not help but sigh. It seemed that it was not an easy task for the Lord to push this world into the big world, so that it could exist eternally in the state of chaos without any tribulations. Just as Luo Fan was sighing, the Lord suddenly sighed. The foundation of this world is really too weak. These words made Luo Fan surprised for a while. Suddenly, he remembered how powerful a holy venerate was. As a powerful existence who could walk on 9 paths and obtain the holy decree, the Lord's wisdom was high, and his comprehension was strong. He could see what Luo Fan could see. It was not surprising at all. Only when he was not in a normal state of mind would he not be able to see it. Just as Luo Fan wanted to persuade him, the Lord said, "However, it doesn't matter. Every great trial of heaven and earth is an opportunity to repair the foundation after destruction. As long as I create the corresponding supernatural power, I can definitely make this world grow to a level that is comparable to any other world." As he said this, his eyes shone with unparalleled confidence. He had regained his peerless charm when Luo Fan saw him for the first time. Looking at the Lord's appearance, Luo Fan could not help but admire him. "You are indeed the Lord. In an impossible situation, you have found a chance to transcend." The great trial of heaven and earth was the disaster of this world. It was also the opportunity of this world. A perfect world could grow into a boundless world after going through 9 great trial of heaven and earth. This itself meant that every great trial of heaven and earth was a huge improvement for the perfect world. Since that was the case, for this world that lacked a foundation, as long as it raised the benefits it obtained after each great tribulation to the greatest extent and perfectly unleashed its potential, it would naturally be able to allow the world to continuously surpass its limits. In the end, it would achieve the same level of transformation as a normal perfect world. What the Lord said was to create a corresponding supernatural power. Obviously, he wanted to create a method that could bring out the potential to the maximum. After the Lord finished his sentence, he turned to Luo Fan and said, "I want to focus on creating supernatural power. I'm afraid I can't help this world to survive the great trial of heaven and earth. I wonder if you can help me protect this world?" It was just a small effort. Naturally, Luo Fan would not reject it. He immediately said, "You can focus on creating the technique. I will protect this world." The Lord bowed to Luo Fan. After sincerely thanking him, he did not leave. He directly sat on the ground with his legs crossed and slowly disappeared into the void. Creating supernatural power was definitely an extremely easy thing for an existence like Luo Fan. However, to create a technique that could deal with the great trial of heaven and earth, it was a completely unfamiliar task for both the Lord and Luo Fan to create a supernatural power that could increase the benefits of each great trial of heaven and earth to the maximum and maximize the potential of each great trial of heaven and earth. Naturally, it was not as simple and easy as creating other supernatural powers. How could it be successful if one did not focus on creating it? The flow of time in this world was extremely fast. It had been developing for hundreds of millions of years. Compared to the outside world, it was only a short period of time. Luo Fan naturally had a lot of time here. It was not a big deal for him to spend a little time to help the Holy Senior, and he was not unhappy about it. After the Holy Senior hid in the void, Luo Fan's heart moved, and his mind instantly merged with the heaven and earth. At the moment when his soul merged with the world, the endless murderous aura that was triggered by the great trial of heaven and earth naturally rolled over and directly rushed into his soul. It was as if it wanted to contaminate him and make him look like the many creatures in this world, making him one of the forces that could destroy this world. Facing such a huge and terrifying murderous aura, Luo Fan did not waver. He let the murderous aura wash over him, but he did not have any thoughts that he could not control it. He treated the murderous aura as if it was invisible. It was only the murderous aura of the first great trial of heaven and earth. It could even affect a sage-to-be. To him, it was not enough. After withstanding the murderous aura, Luo Fan merged his soul with the laws of this world. In the blink of an eye, he had already seen through the core mysteries of the laws of this world. This incarnation of his will naturally evolve into the form of a born Taoism aptitude that was most suitable for this world. Then, he frantically devoured the power of this world. In the blink of an eye, his incarnation's power had already advanced to the level of a false saint, far surpassing all the creatures and all the power in this world. Such a violent method of improvement was not stable, and it relied heavily on this world. When he left this world, he could not take any of its power with him. However, it was perfect to use it to deal with the world's own tribulations. After raising his power to this level, Luo Fan had become the most powerful existence in this world. Moreover, because his power came from the laws of this world, he vaguely controlled the entire world. After reaching this step, Luo Fan spread out his power and filled the entire world, causing the entire world to be enveloped by his power. All the time and space between heaven and earth received his protection in an instant. This protection was so well hidden that even the strongest person in this world, apart from Luo Fan, could not discover its existence. However, this protection was extremely powerful. No impact or destruction could penetrate this protection and destroy the time and space in this world as long as it did not exceed the limits of this protection. Time, space, matter, and energy were the four basic existences of this world. But there are differences in the importance of these four basic existences. Among these four basic existences, time and space were the ones that determined whether this world existed or not. Other matter and energy were also one of the foundations of this world. However, as long as time and space were not destroyed, and as long as these two basic existences had not completely disappeared, this world could be considered a complete world. However, as long as either of the two basic existences, time and space, disappeared, then unless this world was created by Luo Fan, a special world that used matter to replace time or space, or energy to replace time or space, this world could not be called a world. It could only be called a space. It was just a time dimension. Therefore, as long as Luo Fan protected the time and space of this world, it was equivalent to protecting this world. No matter how great the destruction of other matter and energy was to this world, it was only a change in the state of this world. It did not affect the existence of this world at all. The changes in this world were not sensed by any living beings in this world. To them, this world did not change at all. They were still immersed in that inexplicable emotion, still immersed in all kinds of karma, still walking towards the final result of destroying this world without stopping. Countless battles that were getting more and more intense appeared everywhere in this world. More and more living beings were dying. The ominous aura that filled the entire world became denser and denser during this process. This process lasted for tens of thousands of years, and the entire world had almost become an azura hell. The incorporeal baleful aura had become so dense that it covered the heavens and the earth. It had turned into a strange mist that enveloped the heavens and the earth, causing the perspective of all living beings in the world to undergo a subtle change. Luo Fan, who had protected this world for tens of thousands of years, looked at this world that was already in a state of devastation. Looking at the dense, ominous aura that filled the world, a thought flashed through his mind. Finally, it's the final moment. With his knowledge, he knew very clearly that the existence of the ominous aura in this world had reached its peak. Ciao! As long as he could get through this hurdle and protect this world, it would not be destroyed in this final explosion. The ominous aura would gradually transform into a strange evolutionary force, becoming the nourishment for the growth of this world, allowing this world to begin to grow beyond imagination. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, the void shook slightly. Next to him, the Lord's figure slowly emerged. After completely appearing, the Lord bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you for your protection for tens of thousands of years, my friend. Now, I have created a magical power called the Future Heaven and Earth Calamity Technique. It will definitely be able to push this Heaven and Earth Calamity Technique to its limit, allowing the benefits that this world will obtain after surviving the Heaven and Earth Calamity Technique will increase by several times, thus making up for the original foundation of this world. Future Heaven and Earth Calamity Technique. Congratulations on mastering this magical power, my friend. There is hope for you to achieve Tao in the future." Luo Fan returned the bow. The Lord smiled and said, "I hope that my friend will have a taste of this technique." As he spoke, he stood up and raised his hand to slap the void. In an instant, a sky-blue light surged out of his hand. The sky-blue light was extremely mysterious. Although it was just light, it naturally revealed a sense of flow, and it also emitted an aura that was almost eternal and indestructible. As soon as it appeared, it turned into a giant hand that suddenly reached into the void and directly made a strange handprint in the void. It seemed like it was grabbing a strange ball, but the 5 fingers were encircled in a very strange way. The distance between each 2 fingers was constantly changing inexplicably, faintly containing all the mysteries of the world and the universe within it. After the handprint was formed, the many murderous auras that existed in the entire world that had turned into a thick fog seemed to be attracted by a black hole, crazily pouring into the handprint. It directly poured into the center of the handprint, forming a more and more obvious, more and more substantial, and more real black sphere between the 5 fingers. The suction force was extremely strong, and the capacity of the handprint had reached an unbelievable level. The murderous auras in the entire world seemed to be pouring into a bottomless abyss. No matter how much it poured in, it only caused the color of the black sphere to change. However, there were no signs of it reaching its limit, as if it could contain endless murderous auras at this time. In the midst of the Heaven and Earth Calamity Technique, the murderous auras in the world were endless. The handprint absorbed so much murderous auras, but it did not cause the murderous auras in the world to become thinner. Any bit of murderous auras that enter the handprint would naturally produce the same amount of murderous auras in the world. It was as if there was originally an endless sea of murderous auras around the world. So no matter how much of the murderous auras were absorbed, there would still be more murderous auras flowing out, filling up the pit created by the absorption of the murderous auras. It is indeed a powerful supernatural power. In this way, The benefits that this world can obtain after surviving the calamity of the world will increase by countless times. Looking at the method that the Lord used, Luo Fan could not help but secretly praise. The murderous auras at this time represented the danger of the calamity of the world. However, after surviving the calamity of the world, the murderous auras would become the resources for the evolution of the calamity of the world. Therefore, the more murderous auras that were gathered, the greater the benefits that this world would obtain after surviving the calamity of the world. If it could attract an unlimited amount of murderous auras, then the benefits that this world would obtain after surviving the calamity of the world would increase by countless times. Of course, this was only in theory. Normally, even a sage would not be able to attract tens of thousands of times more murderous auras. Moreover, this was the Lord who was many times weaker than a sage. Therefore, the benefits that this world could obtain after surviving the calamity of the world would depend on the Lord's endurance and the amount of murderous auras that he could absorb. Obviously, it was not easy to perform the future calamity of the world. Even though the Lord had endless supernatural power and unlimited power in this world, his expression was extremely solemn as he maintained the handprint. He was extremely nervous. Luo Fan could faintly feel the pressure that the Lord was enduring from his movements. Although the Lord did not tremble due to his strong control over his body, he could still feel it from the changes in the flow of his energy. At this time, he was already giving it his all, and every second was a torture. After a year, at a certain moment, Luo Fan looked at the ball in the handprint and had an inexplicable realization. It is exactly 5 times. Obviously, at this time, the amount of murderous aura in the handprint was exactly 5 times more than the original amount of murderous auras in this world at this time. The Lord's eyes were already showing signs of being overwhelmed. The surging power in his body had reached its limit, and a strong aura was constantly emitted from his body. What a pity. After a long time, he sighed. With a thought, the giant sky blue handprint changed. In an instant, endless rays of light and lines that existed in the handprint directly appeared on the surface of the black ball that was as dark as an abyss. After these lines appeared, they began to revolve around the black ball in a complicated and mysterious trajectory as if they were alive. As the trajectory revolved, the black ball began to emit an inexplicable golden light. Under the illumination of this golden light, the endless murderous auras that existed in this world seemed to have been ignited like gasoline. With the black ball as the center, a wider and wider area was quickly dyed golden and turned into golden light. Along with this process, an inexplicable joy was naturally born in this world, causing the remaining living beings in this world, who were less than a 10,000,000th of what they had been before, to feel an inexplicable joy. Chapter 14:27. An exuberant vitality naturally began to appear out of thin air between heaven and earth. Thanks to this vitality, heaven and earth, which had already suffered great losses and had been severely damaged due to the battle between many living beings, began to recover rapidly. The matter and energy that had originally been scattered seemed to be flowing backward, and they quickly returned to their original state. During this process, the golden light was quickly consumed as it was transformed. Not long after, the entire heaven and earth, except for the living beings, had returned to the state it was before the catastrophe of heaven and earth arrived at this time. The golden light still had not completely disappeared. It was still constantly being released from the sphere and was still constantly being integrated into the world. This was because the heaven and earth had completely recovered. The golden light that continued to appear now began to transform into a sublime and evolutionary force, causing the entire heaven and earth to begin to wriggle in a very strange manner. During this wriggling, the vitality of heaven and earth began to thicken at a speed visible to the naked eye. Following this, the space and time of heaven and earth began to expand crazily. The stability of the space and the stability of time were greatly enhanced during this process. The changes happened almost instantaneously. In just a few blinks of an eye, the heaven and earth had become a world of difference from before. Luo Fan looked at the changes of the heaven and earth and was secretly in awe. Such a change was indeed worthy of being an evolution after the catastrophe of heaven and earth had passed. At this moment, the Lord had an inexplicable look of joy on his face. The heaven and earth had obtained great benefits and had become much stronger than before. This was naturally a good thing that made him happy. However, what made him even happier and more excited at this moment was not this, but the fact that the changes of the heaven and earth meant that the future heaven and earth calamity method that he had previously created was effective. It was a magical power that could indeed make up for the lack of foundation of the heaven and earth. And this, obviously, it also meant that his plan to use this heaven and earth to give him a chance to become a saint and allow him to have eternal time had a higher chance of success. How could he not be happy? The golden light seemed to continuously surge out of the ball. It continuously turned into resources for the growth of the heaven and earth, allowing the heaven and earth to advance as if there was no limit. It allowed the heaven and earth to obtain more and more benefits in the process, becoming more and more different from before. The entire process lasted for several hours. By the time the sphere had completely turned into golden light and was absorbed by the world, the entire world was already tens of thousands of times wider than before. The stability of time and space had officially surpassed the great thousand realms. Although there was still a gap between it and the truly perfect world like the Earth, the universe, and the primordial world. However, they could barely be considered to be on the same level. At this moment, the world seemed to be a wild and primitive world that had just been established. There were very few living beings in this world, and they were scattered all over the world, which was why the land was vast, but people were scarce. It was as if it had been created for this world. When everything had calmed down, Luo Fan said to the Lord, "Congratulations on obtaining such a good foundation." The Lord heaved a sigh of relief and said, "You are being too polite. Although there are some gains, there's still a long way to go before it can truly become a foundation. It can only be regarded as a glimmer of hope, but it is not worthy of fellow Taoists' congratulations." Luo Fan smiled and said, "The chance of becoming a sage is so slim." He said, "The chance of becoming a saint is so slim. With this sliver of hope, it is already the dream of countless cultivators in the world. How can it not be congratulated? Fellow Taoist, you're being modest." Hearing this, the Lord smiled and did not refute. He just said, "The next tribulation of heaven and earth will definitely be more difficult than this one. I wonder if fellow Taoist can help me arrange this world and prepare for the next tribulation of heaven and earth." It was such a rare opportunity to personally witness the tribulation of heaven and earth. How could Luo Fan refuse? Naturally, he agreed without hesitation. After the tribulation of heaven and earth, the speed of time was much slower than before, although it was still tens of thousands of times faster than the flowing light world. However, it was no longer the same as before, where a short while was equivalent to hundreds of millions of years. Regarding this, whether it was Luo Fan or the Lord, they could feel it very clearly. In this way, the next tribulation of heaven and earth would take tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of millions of years. However, it could not be like before, where it was equivalent to a short while in the flowing light world. Instead, it would take many years to arrive. While the consciousness incarnation was arranging the world in order to help the world survive the second tribulation of heaven and earth, the real bodies of Luo Fan and the Lord were outside the world, quietly watching the evolution of the world. After the first tribulation of heaven and earth, the world was no longer inexplicably illusory like before. An indescribable sense of reality emerged from the world. This sense of reality was faintly more real than the flowing light world. At this moment, Luo Fan could really feel that this place was really the core of the flowing light world. As for the treasure-seizing conference at this time, whether it was Luo Fan or the Lord, they had unknowingly forgotten about it. Compared to this world that had a chance to grow into a big world, What was the treasure seizing conference? After surviving the first tribulation of heaven and earth, there could be such growth. Perhaps after surviving the fifth tribulation of heaven and earth, the world would be able to surpass the earth and the universe, and directly exist in a state of chaos. Luo Fan looked at the world in front of him and thought to himself, the difficulty of each tribulation of heaven and earth would increase. Therefore, the benefits obtained from passing through each heavenly tribulation would also increase. However, no matter how much it increased, there wouldn't be much of a change in its essence. Therefore, at this time, when Luo Fan saw the benefits obtained after surviving the first tribulation of heaven and earth, his heart naturally deduced the changes that the world would undergo after going through the tribulation of heaven and earth. However, this should be the limit. If there is no fundamental change, the world will definitely not be able to survive the sixth tribulation of heaven and earth. After all, the foundation is not strong enough. Luo Fan secretly sighed. Although the Lord had created the future tribulation of heaven and earth, which was a supernatural power that used the tribulation of heaven and earth to make up for the foundation, he tried his best to shorten the gap between the world and the real perfect world. However, a congenital deficiency was a congenital deficiency, even if it could completely eliminate the difference between the appearance of the world. That fundamental deficiency still existed. This fundamental deficiency might not have any effect at other times, but when the strength of the tribulation of heaven and earth exceeded the limit that the Lord could withstand, when he needed to rely on the power of the world itself to resist the tribulation of heaven and earth, this fundamental deficiency would become a fatal flaw. Forget it. Why should I worry about him? That's at least a few 100 million trillion years later. The Lord is a genius. He can always think of a real way to solve this fundamental deficiency. Luo Fan thought so and directly threw this problem to the back of his mind, not bothering about it anymore. While Luo Fan's mind was in turmoil, the Lord, who was not far away from him, was smiling faintly. It was as if he could not see the hidden danger of the world and was still immersed in the joy of the opportunity to make up for the deficiency of the foundation. Luo Fan glanced at him and no longer looked at him. In his heart, he was secretly deducing and comprehending the formation that he had obtained from the Lord's cultivation path, the formation that swallowed the state of chaos. Previously, he only felt that the formation that swallowed the state of chaos was extremely mysterious and could give him a great inspiration, greatly supplementing his worldview. It was just a great improvement, and he did not have much hope for this formation. However, now, after seeing the birth of the world in front of him, he realized that he might have underestimated this formation. The Lord could use this formation to swallow the state of chaos to create this kind of perfect world, thereby obtaining a chance to surpass the earth and the universe, surpassing all perfect worlds. He might be able to use the same method to do this. Of course, the Lord used the 9 holy wills that he had obtained as the materials to set up the formation. So the power of the formation was extremely close to the sage realm. Of course, Luo Fan did not have 9 holy wills at the moment. Even if he could barely set up the formation with the help of the 81 magic treasures, the final effect would certainly not be as good as the formation that was set up with 9 holy wills, and it was impossible to copy the method exactly. Therefore, even if Luo Fan wanted to copy the Lord's method, he still needed to spend endless time and energy to comprehend and create it. At this moment, in his heart, the mysterious formation, the 81 level, 9 pseudo-saint treasures, the profoundness of the holy wills, everything was spiraling, decomposing, and reconstructing. The formation contained various mysteries that could only be comprehended by supreme venerable ones. He extracted them bit by bit and comprehended them one by one. At the same time, the profoundness of the 9 holy wills was also being analyzed bit by bit. As for the 81 level, 9 pseudo-saint treasures, he did not miss a single one. During this process, his eyes were filled with endless information that poured down like a waterfall. The profundities of the formation were being excavated by him more and more. The key points and difficulties were also being found by him more and more, and were being solved by him one by one. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan felt some kind of inexplicable touch coming from his will incarnation, causing him to suddenly recover from that incomparably deep comprehension. With a thought, he looked at the sky and earth. At this moment, the sky and earth were once again shrouded by an inexplicable, ominous aura. Evidently, the Second World Calamity had arrived. The Second World Calamity actually came after 300 billion years. With a slight sense, Luo Fan understood how much time had passed in that world and couldn't help sighing. When he was in the primordial world, there was only a difference of a few million years between the first and second Great Tribulation of heaven and earth. However, the second Great Tribulation of heaven and earth in this world actually took 300 billion years to brew. The difference was just too great. 300 billion years in that world was less than 3 years in the flowing light world. In the past 300 billion years, Luo Fans and the Holy Venerables will incarnations have been operating in the world, and they had already turned the world into an incomparably prosperous paradise for cultivation. At this moment, the cultivation civilization in the world was extremely prosperous. Although the strongest experts were still at the sage-to-be level, they had already reached the advanced sage-to-be level. It was no longer like the first tribulation of heaven and earth, when the strongest experts in the whole world had at most just stepped into the sage-to-be level. Moreover, apart from the great increase in the strength of the strongest experts, the number of strongest experts had also increased. However, it was still many times more than before. During the first tribulation of heaven and earth, there were only tens of thousands of quasi-sage realm living beings. But now, the number of quasi-sage realm living beings in the world was overwhelming. It had already reached hundreds of millions. With so many quasi-sages, it would be a piece of cake for them to destroy the world millions of times over, let alone once. After 300 billion years of development, Luo Fan and the Holy Saint had already become the strongest experts in this world. They had become existences known as Tao ancestors. Their status was so high that it had almost reached the pinnacle. It could be said that even the sages of the universe on Earth could not compare to their status in this world on this day. The incarnation of Luo Fan's psyche said to the Lord's psyche incarnation, "My friend, I will be the carrier of the second apocalypse of heaven and earth. Please be prepared." The Holy Venerable smiled and said, "Thank you for your trouble, my friend." Luo Fan nodded. He opened up his mind. In an instant, an endless evil spirit was born in his mind. Pina instantly affected the whole world, causing the evil spirit that already existed in this world to instantly increase by many times. As the evil spirit increased, many living beings in this world that could originally resist the influence of the evil spirit were instantly controlled by it. All the entanglements of karma and fate over the past 300 billion years erupted under the guidance of this evil spirit. At this moment, the entire world's laws distorted subtly. All sorts of inconceivable changes were born. Everything seemed to explode, causing the originally peaceful appearance of the entire world to undergo an earth-shattering change. As for Luo Fan, after opening up his mind, his whole body gradually disappeared into the void and gradually became one with the great way of the world. He became an existence similar to the will of the world, and his spiritual wisdom as a living being was gradually restrained. The will of the world began to gradually grow. After this change, all the entanglements of karma and fate over the past 300 billion years began to strengthen by 1,000 times. The effect was extremely shocking. When the entanglements of karma and fate were normal, the original karma could be ended with a slap. However, after the entanglements of karma and fate were strengthened by 1,000 times, the karma could only be ended by cutting the other party into 1,000 pieces. After such a strengthening, the whole world could no longer be stopped from falling into chaos. Even if the Lord had completely controlled all the power of the world, it was still the same. When such a change occurred in the world, Luo Fan's original body, which was outside the world, was shocked. It actually broke out in such a way. He originally wanted to help the Lord survive the second catastrophe of the world, but he did not expect that this catastrophe would be completely different from the first one. It directly descended with him as the core, making him the source of the catastrophe. Such a change was beyond his expectations. At this time, the Lord's entire mind was already attached to the incarnation of consciousness. The body that was left outside the world was already unconscious. Even if Luo Fan wanted to explain to him, he could not do so. Therefore, Luo Fan could only sigh and put his mind on the incarnation of consciousness. He quietly sensed the state of the incarnation of consciousness at this moment. Through that state, he experienced the wonderful perspective and concept that the incarnation of consciousness had after becoming the will of the world. He sensed the control that the incarnation of consciousness had over the world and the influence that it had on the creatures existing in the world. That perspective and concept was completely different from Luo Fan's normal perspective and concept. It was a perspective and concept of the world. In that perspective and concept, the Heaven and Earth Society was an individual. Everything in the world was a parasite that lived in his body and was a part of him. Under such a perspective and concept, he felt that his control over the world and the influence it had on the countless creatures was just like how he was cultivating his body as an ordinary person. He was trying his best to purify himself and remove the impurities in his body. Under such a feeling, it was naturally impossible for him to have any negative emotions. All kinds of thoughts that were previously impossible for him as a cultivator did not appear in his mind at this time. All kinds of ideas that he had previously thought of seemed even more absurd at this time. He almost instinctively created all kinds of the most suitable supernatural powers and the most suitable spells to purify himself. The strength of removing the impurities in his body became stronger. Such a change was extremely novel to Luo Fan's body. It felt like there was an inexplicable joy in it. It seems that after this time, the Lord will not dare to ask me to help him survive the catastrophe of the world. Such a thought suddenly flashed in his mind, and an inexplicable smile unconsciously appeared on his face. The pursuit of the method of cultivation had been engraved in Luo Fan's instinct. Even when his thoughts turned into the will of the world, he did not pursue this kind of instinct. Therefore, at this moment, as the will of the world, he had already created all kinds of extremely powerful techniques, causing the effect of his cultivation to be many times stronger than before. The effect of his cultivation was reflected in the world, which was the battle of many creatures and the death of many creatures. It was countless times faster than before. The scale of the battle of the creatures was larger, and the speed of death was faster. As a result, the damage to the world was more serious, and the speed of the destruction of the world became faster. As for this, the Lord's feeling was clearer. After understanding the source of the many changes, he could not help but exclaim, "Brother Luo Fan is indeed extraordinary. Even the catastrophe of the world has such power." However, although he was exclaiming, his heart agreed with what Luo Fan thought. The next catastrophe of the world must not let Luo Fan continue to stay in this world, because it was too dangerous. The level of this great tribulation of the heavens and earth this time was far from his limit. Therefore, even if this great tribulation of the heavens and earth was under Luo Fan's control and the difficulty had increased by 1,000 times, he was still confident that he could get through it. However, the intensity of the next catastrophe of the world would definitely be countless times stronger than this one. Under Luo Fan's control, the difficulty would increase again. He did not have much confidence that he could get through it. After making up his mind, he put this matter aside and began to protect the time and space of the world. At the same time, he performed the future catastrophe of the world to absorb the evil aura and increase the total amount of evil aura in the world, because the concentration of evil aura would not change. The extra evil aura that was produced was condensed and did not dissipate. Therefore, this method did not increase the difficulty of the catastrophe of the world by much, and he did not have to worry that it would exceed his limit. After 300 billion years of cultivation, The power of the Lord's consciousness in this world was almost infinite, and it was almost at the level of a saint. It wasn't that difficult to protect the time and space of this world. However, because of Luo Fan's control, there would often be all kinds of inexplicable accidents, causing damage that was originally impossible to appear to suddenly appear. Attacks that were originally impossible to harm the space-time under his protection would suddenly break through his protection and harm space-time. Therefore, he could not relax at all. He almost always had to be vigilant of all the possible changes, lest the world was destroyed if he was not careful. Such a process seemed to be the evolution of the world itself, but in fact, it was actually the battle between Luo Fan and the Lord. Other than the instinct to pursue the method of cultivation, Luo Fan's instinct to fight was not much different. Chapter 14:28. Because of Luo Fan's control, this great tribulation of heaven and earth was not as easy as last time. Even though the Lord's control of heaven and earth was much stronger than Luo Fan's, it was still the same. The first great tribulation of heaven and earth was like a person who had an extremely strong defense and allowed his opponent to attack him until his opponent ran out of energy and couldn't continue attacking. Only then would he have passed the great tribulation of heaven and earth. However, the situation this time around was different. This time around, it was as though two opponents of equal strength were fighting back and forth. Moreover, both parties were able to continuously recover their energy during the process. Naturally, the process of the battle would not be as simple as it was in the past, where one would only exhaust their strength once. The time needed was naturally many times longer than before. Therefore, this great tribulation of the heavens and earth lasted for over 1,000,000 years this time. In these millions of years, the entire world was shrouded in a murderous aura. The entanglement of karma and fate for the past 300 billion years continued to erupt, causing the entire world to be damaged at all times. The Lord used his own physical strength to repair the damage from time to time. The entire process seemed to be endless. The Lord's expression was extremely serious throughout the entire process. The changes in the Great Tribulation this time had also exceeded his expectations. It made him truly understand how difficult it was to pass through the Great Tribulation of the world. Although the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth would take an extremely long time, there was still an end to it. After more than 1,000,000 years, the inexplicable murderous aura that had been born out of thin air suddenly stopped growing after reaching its limit. Then, it began to gradually transform into golden light, transforming into the power of the world's growth and sublimation. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that his consciousness incarnation had suddenly lost its state of becoming the will of the world, and had once again become the will of a living being. As for the figure that his will had transformed into, during this process, he appeared in the void beside the Lord. "Thank you, my friend." The Lord bowed and thanked Luo Fan as soon as he saw the incarnation of Luo Fan. Luo Fan sighed, shook his head, and said, "I'm really ashamed. If I weren't here, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. There's no need for this great tribulation to drag on for so long. What's the big deal about dragging it out a little?" Thanks to fellow Taoist guidance, I was able to gain a deeper understanding of the nature of this tribulation and not underestimate it. Otherwise, I would have waited for the great tribulation of heaven and earth lightly. There might not be any problems this time, but I'm afraid that I will suffer a great loss next time. The Holy Venerable said. Luo Fan listened. He merely smiled and said, "No matter what, my presence here has instead made the tribulation of the world even more difficult. I'm truly ashamed and have no face to continue staying here." As he spoke, a thought flashed through his mind. His will incarnation naturally dispersed and disappeared into thin air, returning to his body. At this moment, the Lord opened his eyes and sighed. "Why do you have to do this? Even if I'm outside this world, I can still see everything clearly, and it doesn't affect me at all." Luo Fan smiled. When the Lord heard this, he did not say much. After all, he was not an ordinary person. He clearly understood each other's feelings. Some necessary polite words were indeed necessary. However, there was no need for more hypocritical words and actions. At this time, Luo Fan looked in from the perspective of the outside world and found that the process of growth and sublimation was very different from what it looked like from the inside. He didn't see any golden light. On the contrary, he could only see that the world began to slowly roll during this process. The world began to become wider, and the flow of time seemed to be further slowed down. The feeling of the almost perfect world became more and more obvious. In a trance, looking at the world, Luo Fan suddenly felt that he was facing the earth, the universe, or the primitive world. There was a kind of vast artistic conception coming from it, and it made it difficult for him to look at the world with his previous eyes. What a great catastrophe! Luo Fan looked at the changes in the world and could not help but exclaim. Although the flow of time in the world had been constantly slowing down, it was still extremely fast compared to the flow of time in the outside world. Just as Luo Fan was exclaiming, the originally rather long process of growth and sublimation had come to an end. And at this time, just when Luo Fan secretly felt that this change might end like the last time, a change that exceeded his expectations suddenly appeared. That part of the world that was originally round and square suddenly connected with the ends of the world in all directions. In an instant, the original round sky and square earth had turned into a perfectly round sphere. It looked like a boundless world with a round sky and square earth had turned into a huge planet that was beyond the imagination of all living beings. This change was something that Luo Fan had never encountered after opening up so many worlds. However, it caused his eyes to flash with astonishment. However, he was, after all, extraordinarily intelligent. Since this had already happened, he quickly figured out the reason behind it. Forming a core with a world, causing the world to operate on its own, sublimate, and transform. This is indeed a powerful world technique. He exclaimed again. After this world became perfectly round, it naturally exuded a sense of perfection and immortality. It was as if such a change had caused the world to become flawless, and it had become 1,000 times sturdier. It slowly rotated in front of Luo Fan. The frequency and speed of its rotation contained the profound mysteries of the Great Tao. There seemed to be some of the mysteries of the sacred Venerable's cultivation path contained within it. It seemed to have an inexplicable connection with the chaotic state outside the world. They were carrying out some kind of indescribable resonance, and it seemed to be transmitting some kind of strange power. Looks like this is the new method that the Holy Venerate has thought of. By cultivating the golden elixir Great Tao to cultivate this world, the world will continue to grow and eventually break through the great tribulation of heaven and earth again and again, breaking through the endless barriers and stepping into the level of eternity. Luo Fan's thoughts flashed through his mind. In the blink of an eye, he understood what was going on. After the world turned into a perfectly round pill, it naturally emitted a strange mist that gradually covered the pill, making it difficult for Luo Fan to directly see the scene in that world. This was equivalent to the core qi around the golden core of those who cultivated the golden core Tao. If it was someone who cultivated the golden core Great Tao, this kind of core qi wouldn't be able to withstand it. That was the transformation of the golden core's energy, and it was an extremely profound defensive technique that possessed inconceivable might. As it surged and shook, it was sufficient to destroy the heavens and the earth. Under its defense, it could almost isolate everything, defend against everything. Compared to the world pill, this kind of pill chi would only be even more terrifying and shocking. Perhaps it might not be enough to deal with the true state of primal chaos, but it could isolate some prying eyes and the changes in space and time in the outside world. That was not a difficult thing to do. When the chi of the world elixir had covered the world elixir, and all the changes inside, it were completely out of Luo Fan's range of perception. The Lord's real body slowly opened his eyes and said to Luo Fan, "I have just completed the method of making the world elixir, and I still can't control it perfectly. I can't control the chi of the world elixir to isolate the power. I originally wanted to continue discussing with you, but I didn't expect that I would have to stop now. It's really a pity at this moment." Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable vibration coming from all directions. In an instant, he understood what the Lord was talking about. The core chi emitted by the world pill had an unbelievable ability to isolate things. Not only did it isolate his prying eyes, but it also isolated its connection with the flowing light world. The flowing light world could exist. It was originally because of the existence that simulated the state of primal chaos. It was because the existence that simulated the state of primal chaos had an extraordinary dimension of time, which was why the flowing light world had such an extraordinary dimension of time. Therefore, it could be said that the world in front of him was the core of the flowing light world. It was because of this world, the flowing light world, that it existed. And at this moment, the core chi had completely isolated the world, which was obviously equivalent to isolating the flowing light world from its core. Isolating an object from its core was equivalent to isolating a computer's host and monitor. In the end, the vast and boundless network world that was originally displayed on the monitor would completely disappear. For the flowing light world in front of him, it was obvious that it had lost its core, and the entire flowing light world was gradually beginning to collapse. And now, the inexplicable vibration coming from all directions was the abnormality caused by the collapse of the flowing light world. At this moment, the world that the Lord had created in the Sea of Clouds world, the world where the treasure seizing conference was held, also collapsed in an instant. The thousands of living beings directly broke away from the world, regained their original cultivation level, and appeared in the boundless world of flowing light. What's going on? Why is this world collapsing? In an instant, all the cultivators saw the changes in their surroundings, and their hearts were filled with shock. Among them, the Book Supreme and the others were the most shocked. For other cultivators, the flowing light world was just a place where they held the Dharma discussion conference. But for the Book Supreme and the others, this was their home. After they had become the Lord's disciples, they had spent most of their time serving the Lord in this flowing light world for many years. Now that the flowing light world was suddenly collapsing, to them, it was naturally like their own home had suddenly collapsed. It was easy to imagine how shocked they were. While in shock, they spread out their own perception and scanned the entire flowing light world, looking for their backbone, the Lord. It was a pity that the Lord was currently at the core of the flowing light world. He was in the flowing light world, but not in the flowing light world at the same time. He was in an extremely mysterious place. Under such circumstances, even if the Book Supreme scanned in all directions, how could he find the Lord? Not being able to find the Lord, they could not help but panic. Could it be that Master failed to break through to the sage realm? This thought flashed through their minds involuntarily. The Book Supreme and the others looked at each other. Seeing such a similar thought in the other party's eyes, they could not help but panic even more. Although the Lord had previously said that he would not break through to the sage realm right away, and that he needed to cultivate in isolation for a period of time, it was just a casual statement. What was the specific situation? How could they be completely sure? Perhaps the Lord suddenly had an epiphany during his cultivation and had the confidence to break through to the sage realm, so he directly broke through. Who knew? Where is Luo Fan? The Remnant Master and Luo Fan had a good relationship, and he immediately thought of the existence of another cultivator who did not participate in the Treasure Seizing Conference. However, after looking around, he did not find Luo Fan. For a moment, he could not help but have an ominous premonition. He suddenly had a premonition that Luo Fan might have something to do with the collapse of the flowing light world. As soon as he asked this question, the Book Supreme and the others also noticed it. All of a sudden, their facial expressions changed greatly. Something must have happened. If we want to know where Master is, we must first find Luo Fan. The Book Supreme made a judgment in an instant. After making the judgment, he made a prompt decision and said, "The world is about to be destroyed. We cannot continue to stay here. We must leave as soon as possible." As he was speaking, the Book Supreme raised his hand and clapped in the void. Instantly, a huge space-time tunnel appeared directly in front of him. What seeped out of this space-time passageway was a neutral and peaceful aura mixed with destruction. It was an aura that belonged to the demon world. Obviously, this space-time tunnel led to another dimension of time, the demon realm. As the eldest disciple of the Lord, although the Lord could not completely control the flowing light world, it was still very easy for him to open a tunnel to enter and exit the flowing light world freely. After opening the space-time tunnel, the Book Supreme shouted loudly, "The flowing light world is no longer safe. My fellow cultivators, please leave this place first." Everyone was shocked at this moment. Hearing the Book Supreme's words, like a drowning man grasping at a straw, they all hurriedly thanked him and rushed into the space-time tunnel. In the blink of an eye, only the Book Supreme and the others were left in the flowing light world. At this time, the flowing light world had already started to be destroyed. Endless cracks filled the whole world and endless tiny fragments. This made the whole flowing light world look like it was made up of tiny fragments. Moreover, from time to time, a kind of horrifying destruction appeared beside the Book Supreme and the others, almost dismembering them. The Book Supreme and the others waited for a while. When the whole flowing light world gradually turned into a gray and chaotic world, they finally could not hold on any longer. They sighed helplessly and stepped into the space-time tunnel, disappearing from the flowing light world that was about to be destroyed. At this time, the flowing light world suddenly collapsed. The originally boundless flowing light world, which was faintly in line with the higher dimension of time and the state of chaos, finally disappeared completely. As for the fragments of the flowing light world, they were completely devoured by the space-time of the demon realm, either merging into time or space, disappearing at an even faster speed, as if they had never appeared. After leaving the flowing light world, the Book Supreme and the others reappeared in the void above the island where they had first entered the flowing light world. The time dimension of the flowing light world was different from that of the demon realm. The flow of time here was many times slower than that of the demon realm. Although all of them did not stay in the flowing light world for a long time, only 100 years had already passed in the demon realm. In other words, for the many creatures in the demon realm, the time when the Tao discussion began was 1,000,000 years ago. In other words, to the numerous living beings in the devil dimension, the Tao discussion had started 1,000,000 years ago. In other words, for the many creatures in the demon realm, the time when the Tao discussion began was 1,000,000 years ago. Back then, on this island, no one knew how many pseudo-sage level cultivators were waiting, looking forward, and struggling. But now, the number of those cultivators had been reduced by more than 100 times. Only those cultivators who had deep relationships with the cultivators who participated in the Tao discussion continued to wait here. Apart from that, the other cultivators had all left the island, although 1,000,000 years was not a long time for any pseudo-sage level cultivator. But it was not to the extent where they were willing to squander it freely. Would they waste 1,000,000 years just because of a curiosity? They were not so extravagant. After leaving the collapsing flowing light world, the Book Supreme, since for a while, then frowned and said to the remnant venerable, "Junior brother, have you sensed the location of Luo Fan?" "Not at all," the remnant venerable said immediately. "I can locate anyone based on the guidance of their aura. But for Luo Fan, I can't find any trace of him at all. Either his strength is as strong as Master's, and he can hide from my calculation, or he is no longer in this world." Hearing this, the expressions of the Book Supreme and the others changed slightly. No matter which of the two situations the venerable remnant mentioned, they weren't things that could make them feel relaxed. If Luo Fan had such a horrifying strength, then if he intentionally approached them and intentionally came to participate in the Tao discussion, then there's probably a secret that's worth pondering over. If Luo Fan was not in this world, didn't it mean that he and their master had disappeared together? This was also something they were unwilling to accept. What the hell is going on? Wu Zun was very agitated at this moment. Even though he had 9 beauties by his side, comforting him, he still seemed extremely irritated. Under this agitation, his aura fluctuated intensely. Vaguely, the surrounding time and space were twisted and destroyed. If it weren't for the suppression of the pseudo-sage level cultivators around him, the effect of his aura could not be fully released. Otherwise, this change might have been enough to destroy the hollow within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Calm down. The Book Supreme saw that something was wrong and shouted. This voice was like a morning bell and evening drum. It directly shook away Wu Zun's agitation, and his eyes became clear again. After recovering, Wu Zun remembered what he had just done and smiled bitterly. I'm sorry, I was distracted because of what happened in the Treasure Season Conference. It was so embarrassing. The Book Supreme took a look at him and found that he did not have a single level 9 pseudo-sage level treasure. He suddenly realized what was going on and said, "Giving birth to offspring has already consumed your luck. Now, you're only showing off by not having a magic treasure. Compared to other performances, it's already countless times better. You should be glad. If it's just that I can't find a magic treasure, of course, I should be glad." Wu Zun smiled bitterly. These words, the Book Supreme was slightly stunned. Those who participated in the Tao discussion had lived for at least 1,000,000 years. Even the weakest among them had at least found a level 9 pseudo-sage level treasure. Wu Zun did not find any level 9 pseudo-sage level treasure, which was extremely embarrassing. It was enough to make Wu Zun feel agitated just now. However, Wu Zun did not seem to care about this, so why was he still so agitated? Wu Zun sighed and said, "When I was kicked out of that world, I don't know why my natal magic treasure was left there. Now, it has been destroyed, along with the destruction of the flowing light world." What? The Book Supreme and the others were shocked. The expressions of Wu Zun's women changed greatly. Their faces were full of panic, and Yao Zun, who was already pregnant, was full of regret. For Luo Fan, who had become a pseudo-sage level treasure with his own ability, magic treasures were only a means to increase his strength. Even if he lost it, he would only feel regret and heartache at most. His strength would not be affected, and his mood would not be affected. However, it was different for the cultivators in the demon realm. The method for the cultivators in the demon realm to become a pseudo-sage level treasure was to first refine their magic treasure into a pseudo-sage level treasure, and then use the power of the magic treasure to push themselves into the level of a pseudo-sage level treasure. After becoming a pseudo-sage level treasure, the cultivation method was similar. They had to push the magic treasure into the next level before they could use the power of the magic treasure to pull their cultivation to the corresponding level. This magic treasure that could pull their cultivation to the next level was their natal magic treasure. With the power of a life-bound magic treasure, if a cultivator lost their life-bound magic treasure, the impact could be imagined. Not only would their strength be greatly damaged, but their future cultivation would also be greatly affected. Unless they refined this magic treasure again, they would never be able to increase their cultivation. Chapter 1429. Just when the Book Supreme and the others were shocked by Wu Zun's loss, the other level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators were already satisfied and bid farewell to them one after another. Not long after, they left the island with the other pseudo-sage cultivators. In the blink of an eye, the thousands of cultivators in the sky above the island became only the Book Supreme and the others. For the Book Supreme, the collapse of the flowing light world, the disappearance of the Holy Venerable, and Luo Fan was naturally a big deal. However, for the other cultivators, they had already achieved their goal of participating in the Tao Discussion Conference. What happened to the flowing light world, the Holy Venerable, and Luo Fan had nothing to do with them. Since it had nothing to do with them, of course, they were too lazy to care about it. When they found an opportunity, they would naturally leave. After all, it had been 1,000,000 years, and they did not know what changes had happened to them that they needed to control. The Book Supreme and the others looked at the leaving cultivators without any change in their expressions. They were extremely clear about the mentality of the others and naturally understood that this was unavoidable. How could they possibly feel indignant about this choice that should have been expected in the first place? Let's wait here. I think Master will definitely be fine. The Broken Master and the others nodded helplessly when they heard the Book Supreme's words. It seemed that they could only do so now. Looking for a cultivator whose cultivation was much higher than theirs in the boundless world was like looking for a needle in a haystack. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. In comparison, it was like searching for a headless fly. In comparison, the efficiency was not as good as staying on the island and cultivating quietly. After reaching a consensus, the Book Supreme and the others did not hesitate anymore. They landed on the island and started cultivating in their cave residences. Even for the Book Supreme and the others, the Tao Discussion Conference was also very beneficial. After the Tao Discussion Conference, almost all of them understood something. Almost all of them seemed to have comprehended something, and they felt that as long as they cultivated a little, their cultivation would be able to make great progress. While the Book Supreme and the others were waiting anxiously on the island, Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable had already entered an extremely mysterious place. This place was a boundless void. Beneath the void, or rather, in the depths of the void, in a place where nothing could possibly exist, there was an incomparably powerful and vast existence vaguely present. That kind of existence exuded an inexplicable sense of chaos. It was as if time, space, matter, and energy were all mixed together in a very strange state of chaos. That was a chaotic state. Floating in the void, Luo Fan quietly sensed the various things around him and came to such a realization in his heart. This place of nothingness was the border between the demon realm and the earth universe. This place did not belong to the demon realm, nor did it belong to the earth universe, but at the same time, it belonged to the demon realm. At the same time, it belonged to earth and the universe. In the depths of this place, or in other words, outside of this place, was the boundless primal chaos that could open up countless perfect worlds as vast as the earth and the universe if one were to take a single point out of it. Previously, when the flowing light world collapsed, the Holy Venerable had brought him through countless layers of barriers and directly arrived at this place. At this very moment, in front of him, it was a world that had gone through 2 apocalypses of heaven and earth, quietly floating in the void. The Holy Venerable was beside him, quietly looking at the void around them like the Holy Venerable. He looked at the strange world in front of him that had already formed a world elixir and was emitting an inexplicable elixir chi. At this moment, the elixir was slowly rotating according to some extremely complicated and profound principles. The surrounding elixir chi was constantly thickening and gradually turned into the shape of a magic cloud. It was slightly surging, showing some kind of mysterious world that even Luo Fan could not understand. This place was closer to the state of primal chaos than the flowing light world. After arriving here, the state of primal chaos faintly resonated with this world pill. Luo Fan could even faintly feel that the way the elixir was circulating had an inexplicable resonance with the chaotic state under the void. This made the elixir seem to be breaking through the barrier of this place and really penetrating into the chaotic state. Using this place as a transition is indeed a good choice. Luo Fan secretly praised. In the end, this world would definitely plunge into the state of chaos and exist outside of the Earth's universe. Currently, the strength of the world was not strong enough to directly come into contact with the chaotic state. Using this place that was extremely close to the chaotic state as a transition to allow the world to gradually get used to the terror and pressure of the chaotic state was obviously a good idea. At this moment, the Holy Venerable suddenly let out a sigh and said, "Unfortunately, this world can't be maintained in the chaotic state. Otherwise, it would be best to directly throw it into the chaotic state." What a pity. When Luo Fan heard this, he could only helplessly smile and say, "What's there to be a pity about? Now, it has only gone through 2 apocalypses of heaven and earth. There are still 7 opportunities to sublimate and evolve. 7 opportunities? That also means 7 times of danger." The Holy Venerable sighed again. When Luo Fan heard this, he only shook his head and did not say anything more. After experiencing the indirect and direct Taoism discussion, and having experienced living with the Holy Venerable's incarnation for 300 billion years, he now had a very deep understanding of the Holy Venerable. Naturally, he knew that what the Holy Venerable said now was not because he was discouraged, but because he wanted to vent his emotions. There was no need for anyone to persuade him. As expected, the Holy Venerable quickly regained his composure and said, "I've made a fool of myself." When Luo Fan heard this, he only smiled and said, "You're too kind, my friend. From now on, you need to concentrate on your cultivation. I've also comprehended something in my heart, so I'll take my leave now." Since he had said that he had comprehended something in his heart, the Holy Venerable naturally would not put on any drama to persuade him to stay. Therefore, he directly said, "I see. Since you've comprehended something in your heart, you need to meditate and cultivate. I won't urge you to stay any longer. Take care, my friend." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Take care, my friend." As he said this, he bowed slightly and lifted his foot lightly. However, he did not return to the Devil Kingdom, nor did he return to the earth or the universe. Instead, his body directly penetrated the void and stepped into another mysterious place. The place where Luo Fan stepped out was a gray, hazy area that contained an extremely chaotic aura, as if everything was mixed together. This was the gap between the heaven and the earth and the state of chaos. It was also among all the cultivators that Luo Fan had encountered. It was a place that only he could sense and enter. This gap, compared to the place where the Holy Venerable placed the elixir of the world, was closer to the state of chaos. Moreover, this place already contained many characteristics of the primal chaos state. The Holy Venerable watched as Luo Fan suddenly disappeared into the void. However, he could not sense where he had landed at all, and he had no idea where he had gone. He could not help but be shocked. Where did Luo Fan go? Why can't I sense where he is at all? As a powerful venerable who had consecutively changed 10 paths to reach this stage, the Holy Venerable had his own pride. Although he had previously admitted that Luo Fan had the qualifications to be on an equal footing with him, deep down in his heart, he did not think that he was any worse than Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan suddenly walked into a place that he couldn't sense at all and couldn't understand at all. Obviously, this 100 years represented something that Luo Fan could comprehend. Something that Luo Fan knew was something that the Holy Venerable did not know. This made him feel an indescribable unwillingness in his heart. After a while, the Holy Venerable finally calmed down the various changes in his mind. No matter what, now that I have the foundation of the Tao in my hands, the opportunity to become a saint is right in front of me. I don't have much time to waste. As he thought about it, he directly put all the distracting thoughts behind him and directly lifted his foot. He directly stepped into the world that had turned into a world elixir and was surrounded by the world elixir chi. Unlike before, he didn't just use his will to enter the world. Instead, he directly stepped into the world with his own body. He used his real body to feel, to understand everything in the world, and to help the world withstand the various disasters of the world. During this process, he did not even think of sending a message to the Book Venerable and the rest to dispel their worries. For the Holy Venerable, the most important thing was his own cultivation. It was his own path to becoming a saint. The other emotions, such as teacher and disciple, father and son, and father and daughter, were all insignificant. In the past, he still pinned a glimmer of hope on the Book Venerable and the rest. He planned to guide them until they could help him in the future, so he had to guide and train them. But now he discovered that he could only rely on himself to deal with the disaster of the world. Moreover, he no longer needed their help. So how could he still have a mood to care about them? After personally stepping into the world, the Holy Venerable felt a completely different feeling from when his consciousness entered the world. In his senses, the world had become more stable than before, more stable, and even more real. Faintly, he even felt that the world he originally lived in was somewhat inferior to the world in front of him in some aspects. How could this be? The Holy Venerable could not help but feel surprised when he sensed the completely different feeling that the world gave him. He was a creature born and raised in the devil realm. Although he had traveled to countless worlds, he had never sensed anything like this in any of the worlds. What he could feel was that the devil kingdom he grew up in was the most powerful and real existence in the infinite world. Any other world, any space-time, or any heaven and earth could not be compared to the devil kingdom. However, at this time, in the world that he had created, he actually felt a sense of detachment from the devil kingdom. What did this mean? It was hard for him to imagine. Could it be that the number of disasters of the world in that world is less than this world? Or is that world not a perfect world? Thoughts flashed through the holy venerable's mind, and he quickly thought of these two ridiculous possibilities. The reason why these two possibilities were ridiculous was very simple. This was because there were 54 sages in the world that he was born in. Moreover, there were so many pseudo-sage cultivators that it was shocking. How could such a powerful world have survived fewer disasters of the world than the world that he had created? Moreover, if such a powerful world was not a perfect world, why did it not collapse? One had to know that even he was not someone that any world could withstand right now. One could imagine the pressure that the existence of the sages had on the world. A world that could withstand 54 sages. Could it be a boundless world? Although he felt that this speculation was extremely ridiculous and almost impossible, the Holy Venerable could not refute this speculation in the end. However, the Lord could not refute the speculation in the end. The facts were there, and the reasonable explanation was there, even if the explanation was ridiculous. No matter how impossible it was, he could only keep his doubts in his heart. He kept this speculation in his heart and made a decision. Next, he would use this world as the main body and work hard to cultivate this world to a state where it could exist freely in the chaotic state, so that he could detach himself from the world that he was born in. As long as he could do this, it did not matter which of his speculations was true or false. Or even if both of them were false, it would not affect him anymore. With such determination, the Holy Venerable's attention on this world had increased to another level. His adjustment and influence on the world had also become more and more detailed. When the Holy Venerable discovered the existence of the Devil Kingdom, Luo Fan was already quietly floating in the gap between the world and the chaotic state. Luo Fan was already very familiar with this gap between the world and the chaotic state. Even his original body in the future during the Age of Chaos had always been in this gap. Under such circumstances, he even faintly had an inexplicable feeling of returning to his home when he appeared in this gap. Luo Fan raised his eyes and looked in a certain direction. Faintly, there was an inexplicable feeling in his heart. This feeling let him know that his original body was in that direction, in a place that was extremely far away from where he was, although this was the gap between the world and the chaotic state. It contained a lot of aura that belonged to the chaotic state and had many characteristics of the chaotic state. However, it was not the chaotic state after all. If this was the true chaotic state, even if Luo Fan's original body and avatar came from two different time dimensions that were billions of years apart, now they were here. Luo Fan's avatar could also easily go to the original body. Now, this was just a place that contained the aura of the chaotic state. Although it had some characteristics of the chaotic state, it could allow his original body and avatar to connect with each other despite being billions of years apart in time dimensions. But that was all there was to it. Apart from the mysterious connection between the two of them, it was impossible for them to even see each other. However, for the avatar that was on Earth before the world was broken, entering this place was the first time he felt the existence of his original body after returning to this time dimension. No matter what, this was a rare gain. In a trance, the thoughts of Luo Fan's original body and avatar carried out an absolutely deep connection. All of their memories, senses, comprehension, and even everything else were instantly unified. In the Age of Chaos, billions of years later, it was also in the gap between the world and the chaotic state. Luo Fan's original body sat quietly on the surface of the Law Realm. His eyes seemed to be open and closed at the same time. His eyes shone with an endless light of wisdom. Suddenly, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed slightly. The light in his eyes stabilized, and he sighed. I didn't expect this avatar to bring me such a huge gain. I originally thought that the avatar in the great heaven primordial world would bring me such a huge gain. His avatar had grown from the quasi-saint realm to the level 6 pseudo-saint realm in another time dimension. He had even condensed a will that seemed like a holy decree, but was not. This allowed his strength to directly reach the realm of a supremacy. His original body had also improved at the same time. Now, millions of years had passed in this time dimension. His original body's cultivation realm had also risen to the level 6 pseudo-saint realm. Moreover, it had also condensed the same will that seemed like a holy decree, but was not. This was also one of his advantages in the gap between the world and the chaotic state. Because he existed here, even if his avatar had entered another time dimension and returned to the universe before it shattered billions of years ago, he could still sense everything about his avatar at any time. He could experience everything with his avatar at any time and any place. In this way, his cultivation realm, his strength, and everything else would naturally grow together with his avatar. Naturally, it would grow, experience, and evolve together with its avatar. It was only natural that its growth rate would be the same as its avatar. After experiencing so many years of improvement with his avatar, he had gained a wealth of experience. Now, Luo Fan's original body had already modified and improved the law realm beneath him countless times. The current law realm was already countless times stronger than the great 1,000 realms of the past. There was no need to talk about the vastness of the law realm. Back then, it had already been boundless and almost limitless. Now, no matter how much it grew, it was still almost limitless. What was worth mentioning was that the stability of the space and time in this law realm had almost reached the level of the demon realm. It had even reached the level of the earth before the world shattered. The cultivators that such a powerful world could support had also been greatly improved. Back then, it could only support Khanate Grand Luo. Back then, it could only support quasi-saint realm cultivators. Now, the cultivation realm that it could support had directly risen to the pseudo-saint realm. In fact, it wasn't an ordinary pseudo-saint realm cultivator, but a level 9 pseudo-saint realm cultivator. Of course, because the time dimension of the Age of Chaos was different from the time dimension of the Earth before the world shattered, the law realm had only been strengthened for a few million years. In such a short period of time, even if the law realm could already support level 9 pseudo-saint realm cultivators. However, no living being had broken through the quasi-saint realm and stepped onto the steps below the sage realm to become a pseudo-saint. In the law realm, the most powerful living being was only a mid-tier quasi-saint. From this point of view, it could be said that this law realm was a brand new, newborn world. After completely merging with his clone, Luo Fan lowered his head and thought to himself as he looked at the law realm under his feet. Perhaps I can think of a way to substitute it. He had originally only intended to experiment with the evolution of his worldview of laws. He didn't have much expectations for it, nor did he expect the world to develop to any level or achieve any unimaginable goals. However, as time passed and his worldview of laws became more and more perfect, the law realm also became more and more complicated and powerful. Now, it had even surpassed almost all the vast 1,000 worlds and was vaguely approaching the level of the demon realm. Although the remaining gap was like the difference between heaven and earth, he couldn't help but gradually feel an inexplicable expectation. He began to gradually hope that the law realm could do more and play a more powerful role. In the past, when he hadn't met the sacred venerate, although he had some expectations, he couldn't see the direction at all. He had no idea how to develop the law realm and what kind of function it could play. Therefore, he could only instinctively strengthen the law realm, instinctively strengthen the stability of the space and time of this world, and work hard to make the worldview of laws contained in this world more and more perfect. Now, after meeting the sacred venerate and seeing with his own eyes how the sacred venerate opened up a world and used it to survive two great calamities of the world, he suddenly found the direction in which the law realm could evolve. He set his expectations for the law realm as a fixed goal. That goal was to make the law realm truly grow into a perfect world, or even a great world. To make this world the true basis of his worldview of laws. To make it the basis for him to become a sage. Chapter 14:30. It was clearly impossible to transform the law realm into a perfect heaven and earth with its current foundation. After all, the current law realm didn't even have the possibility of triggering a great tribulation. It was even more impossible for it to evolve. Under such circumstances, what Luo Fan needed to do the most right now was to transform the foundation of the law realm and turn it into a holy venerate. He wanted to simulate the primal chaos and transform it into the essence of the world. This was also the true meaning of what Luo Fan meant when he said that they were substituting each other. Based on Luo Fan's current strength, he wanted to be like the holy venerable. He wanted to absorb the chaotic state, let it collapse naturally, and then turn it into a simulated chaotic state. Then, he would develop this simulated chaotic state into a world with the chaotic state as its foundation. Although it was difficult, it was not impossible. However, a world created in this way would only be a brand new world. It cannot possibly be a true law realm. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan wanted to use the rule realm to replace the newly evolved world, what else could it be other than substituting? Thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Endless words and diagrams poured down his mind like a waterfall. Countless plausible solutions emerged one after another in his mind. Among these countless solutions, there were some that seemed rather absurd and completely unworkable. However, some of them seemed to be quite feasible, as if they could really solve the problem by following these methods. However, as Luo Fan carefully studied it, he discovered that among the many methods, there were many methods. Not a single one of them was feasible. No matter how feasible it seemed, no matter how much it seemed like a real solution, it still had a huge flaw in the end. This method was impossible to achieve. After this happened thousands of times, Luo Fan finally had no choice but to admit it. With his current strength, his current understanding of the chaotic state, and even his current understanding of the Saint Venerable's path of cultivation, it was impossible for him to do what he wanted to do. It was impossible for the law realm to replace the world that was directly connected to the primal chaos. Such a fact naturally made Luo Fan rather unhappy. He sat cross-legged on the surface of the realm of law and frowned deeply. He still needed to spend a lot of energy to understand the way of cultivation of the Lord. It was a pity. I don't have the 81 level, 9 pseudo-sage treasures with me. Otherwise, the situation would be countless times better. A true level 9 pseudo-saint treasure was refined from the materials to the level 9 pseudo-saint level. Even if he didn't care about his energy, the time it would take. It would take at least tens of billions of years. If Luo Fan wanted to refine 81 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures to set up the array and completely form the array, it would take a lot of time. But it was really too long. So long that Luo Fan simply did not have the patience to do it. Without the 81 level 9 pseudo-divine treasures, it would have been impossible for Luo Fan to complete the formation unless he had 9 holy wills. If the formation could not be completed, with Luo Fan's current understanding of the primal chaos, it would be impossible for him to absorb the primal chaos. Next, it would be impossible to use indirect methods to open up a world that was not much different from the perfect worlds like the Earth, the universe, and the primordial world. In fact, this was the biggest problem that Luo Fan encountered when he was looking for a solution to the problem. If he could solve this difficult problem, most of the countless methods that he had thought of before would have a chance of being realized, since it was difficult for his main body to succeed because he did not have 81 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. He could only pin his hopes on the clone that had existed for billions of years. At the very least, there were 81 treasures on the clone. They could allow him to build a formation and absorb the primal chaos. Then, he would use the primal chaos that was swallowed to open up a world and form a world that was in line with the law worldview. although this was much worse than directly raising the law realm to the perfect world level. It could not be considered perfect. But since he had no other choice, he could only do this. As he thought of this, Luo Fan's main body slowly closed his eyes. His mind passed through the primal chaos characteristic in the gap between heaven and earth and the primal chaos state, and directly connected his mind with his doppelganger from countless millions of years ago, carefully sensing everything about his doppelganger. At this moment, in another time dimension, Luo Fan's clone sighed and withdrew his gaze from a certain direction of the gray existence. My understanding of that formation is still not enough. If it was enough, I would definitely be able to build that formation even without 81 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. Luo Fan sighed and thought. Thinking about it, he raised his hand and waved gently, and the 81 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures were directly laid out in front of him. Every single one of these 81 magic treasures had almost reached the pinnacle below the saints, so they naturally had all sorts of extraordinary characteristics. It might be an exaggeration to say that they had formed their own space-time, but it was rather simple for them to use their power to shield themselves from the influence of the endless grayish existences around them. Therefore, although these 81 treasures were drowned by the endless gray existence, they did not suffer any damage. Instead, they seemed to be in a normal space-time, sinking and floating, faintly discernible, and there was nothing abnormal about them. These 81 magic treasures all had their own sentience and treasure spirits. However, since the Lord wanted to give these treasures away, he naturally could not leave these treasure spirits for others. These treasures were refined by the Lord bit by bit, and each of them had been with him for at least 10 billion years. If these treasure spirits were still around, wouldn't their memories contain all the experiences and secrets of the saint in the past billions of years? Wouldn't that mean that they would be able to display all the secrets of the saint in front of others? How could the Lord accept this? How could he leave these treasure spirits in these treasures and give them to other level 9 pseudo-sages? As for those treasure spirits, it was obviously unlikely that they would be directly erased. It was possible that the Lord used his own methods to directly extract them and put them into some other world for reincarnation, or he directly sealed them and preserved them. Anything was possible. Of course, although they had lost their treasure spirits, it did not mean that these treasures were useless. In fact, the foundation of these treasures still existed. Although they had lost their treasure spirits, it was only temporary. As long as there were strong people who refined these treasures, they would naturally give birth to new treasure spirits that were based on the treasures themselves. And the treasure spirits that were born in this way were already completely unrelated to the previous treasure spirits. His memory was blank. Only the treasure spirits that were born because of the treasures would be born. They would no longer reveal the secrets of the Lord for a certain period of time, and the power of these treasures could be greatly improved. Luo Fan looked at these treasures, and his heart moved. His mind went through these treasures one by one. He left one mark after another in the depths of these treasures. This was the process of refining these treasures. As he imprinted the marks into the depths of the treasures, these treasures produced an inexplicable vibration, and the treasure light on them skyrocketed out of nowhere. An inexplicable vitality and spirituality gradually emerged from the treasures that were imprinted. In a trance, Luo Fan seemed to see that they were like living creatures from the state of inanimate objects. These 81 treasures were in different shapes. There were all kinds of weapons such as knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, and forks, as well as all kinds of daily necessities. As they were refined by Luo Fan one by one, the brilliance on their bodies intertwined, and the degree of brilliance on their bodies seemed to have undergone a metamorphosis. It was as if each of them had jumped to a higher level, and their appearance changed almost instantly. When all 81 treasures were imprinted by Luo Fan, the power between them was directly intertwined, forming a strange space-time in the gap between the gray world and the chaotic state. This space-time was surrounded by the 81 magic treasures. Although it was not very wide, only tens of thousands of miles in radius, it seemed extremely stable even several times more stable than the space-time of the demon realm. These 81 treasures are indeed extraordinary. They actually have such a natural evolution. Luo Fan looked at the time and space created by the power of the 81 treasures and could not help but exclaim in admiration. The 81 magic treasures were not fixed in place around the space-time. Instead, they were adjusting themselves slightly, causing their appearance to become even more mysterious and exquisite. Vaguely, there was a hint of the Holy Venerable's path of cultivation, which could devour the chaos in the state of formation. Of course, it was only a negligible amount, and it was still far from truly obtaining the essence of the formation. The positions of these treasures were adjusted very carefully, and finally, they gradually stabilized. When the positions of these treasures were fixed, rays of light shot out from the bodies of the treasures, directly into the space-time created by the combination of the power of these treasures, and directly turned into 81 figures. These 81 figures all had the appearance of young boys and girls. At this moment, they were looking at the others with great curiosity. They looked at the space-time that they had opened, looked at the gray existence outside the space-time, and looked at Luo Fan, who was also looking at them. Under the guidance of the imprints inside the treasures, they instinctively knew that the person in front of them was their master. The master who gave them spiritual intelligence, allowed them to exist, and, at the same time, could also erase them at any time. In an instant, the 81 boys and girls bowed to Luo Fan, and each of them greeted Luo Fan as "Greetings, Master." Luo Fan looked at the 81 boys and girls and could not help but smile. From this point of view, when the saint extracted the spiritual intelligence of these treasures, it was only pure spiritual intelligence. Even the power of the treasure spirits should be left in these treasures. If not, these treasure spirits would not have appeared so easily. Instead, they would have to wait for at least a few years, or even longer, for them to be born. For these boys and girls, Luo Fan didn't care. After letting them get up, he let them have their own free time. What he needed to do now was to understand the various characteristics of these treasures, and then use these characteristics to understand the mysterious formation contained in the saint's path of cultivation. This could be seen from the natural interaction of these treasures that could form a form similar to the formation. These 81 magic treasures definitely contain some of the mysteries of that formation. As long as he could understand the characteristics of these magic treasures, as long as he could combine them with that formation, he would be able to compare and complement each other, and he would definitely be able to greatly enhance his understanding of both. Through comparison with the formation, he could understand the various magical functions of the magic treasures more deeply. Through comparison with magic treasures, he was able to comprehend the deeper and more subtle uses of the formation. With a decision in his heart, Luo Fan naturally did not have any hesitation. He carefully sensed the 81 treasures and searched for all the mysteries of the treasures through the brand that he had engraved into the depths of the treasures, all the magical functions. At the same time, in the formation, he also looked for the corresponding magical waves. Through such a comparison, the two would promote each other, complementing each other. It formed an extremely virtuous cycle. As a result, not only did he have a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the 81 Dharma treasures, but he also had a deeper and more complete understanding of the formation time. During this process, time slowly passed. In Luo Fan's own perception, it seemed that thousands of years had passed. At a certain moment, Luo Fan suddenly recovered from the comparison and understanding. It was because through that virtuous cycle, he had already comprehended the 81 magic treasures and the formation to a certain limit. He had reached a state where no matter how meticulous and comprehensive the comparison, it was difficult for him to continue to deepen his understanding of the two. At this time, in the space-time constructed by the 81 treasures, the 81 boys and girls had completely changed that space-time in the past thousands of years. Now, that originally empty space-time had become a small world with a circumference of 10,000 miles. In this small world, there was a vast ocean. In this sea, there were 81 islands. Or rather, Rather than describing the small world as 81 islands in the sea, it would be more accurate to say that it was a continent divided into 81 regions by several rivers. As for the 81 boys and girls, they each occupied an island. After thousands of years, each of these islands could almost be regarded as a complete ecosphere and civilization sphere. There were living creatures that almost reached the limit of the island's tolerance, living on each island. Moreover, those beings had vaguely formed bizarre civilizations that barely formed a single entity, guarding the islands so tightly that nothing could get through and obtaining relative independence. And the 81 boys and girls usually took out the development of the civilization on their respective islands from time to compare with other boys and girls. If they won, they would be extremely happy. If they lost, they would be secretly unhappy. Yet he treated all of this as an extremely strange game. Luo Fan came back to his senses and looked at the changes in the space-time. With a thought, all the changes in the space-time over the past thousands of years directly flowed through his mind. In an instant, he could not help but sigh. How fun! With a sigh, he raised his hand and waved, and the 81 treasures scattered. As the strange form formed by the treasures disappeared, the space-time opened up by the interweaving power of the 81 treasures instantly collapsed and disappeared, along with the 81 islands that existed in that space-time, as well as the countless living creatures on those islands. The 81 boys and girls were originally playing happily when suddenly they felt an inexplicable suction from their bodies, directly sucking them away from their original positions and directly appearing in front of a person. It had also appeared beneath their bodies. Their bodies floated above their heads, making it seem as if their bodies were just their magic treasures. "Greetings, Master." The boys and girls, who understood what was going on, said to Luo Fan in a crisp voice and directly bowed. Seeing this, Luo Fan said lightly, "Everyone, return to your treasures and try to cooperate with my power. Do not be negligent." The 81 boys and girls solemnly responded. Then, each of them turned into streams of light and directly rushed into the treasures above their heads, which were also their bodies. As the 81 boys rushed into the magic treasure, Chun Xiaobei's eyes lit up. Luo Fan instantly felt that the pressure on him to control the 81 treasures had been reduced by more than 100 times. The heavy feeling caused by controlling the 81 treasures at the same time instantly disappeared, and it was replaced by a feeling of control at will. One must know that under normal circumstances, a cultivator who could perfectly exert the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure should be a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator. It might even require a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator whose path of cultivation was compatible with the treasure to be able to truly exert the power of the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure perfectly. Although Luo Fan had understood the nature of his own cultivation, he was not completely shackled by this restriction and could perfectly exert the power of any level 9 pseudo-sage treasure now. But it was impossible for the number to be infinite. With his current cultivation realm, any level 9 pseudo-sage treasure would bring some pressure to him. This kind of pressure alone was nothing to Luo Fan. He could even ignore it. He could treat it as if it was nothing. But when a number of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures increased to a certain extent, the pressure would become extremely obvious and make him feel heavy. Obviously, the number of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures had obviously reached a level that was enough to make him feel heavy pressure. However, this was only in the case where there was no treasure spirit of the treasure. When there was a treasure spirit of the treasure, this situation would change greatly. The treasure spirit of the treasure itself was born because of the various characteristics of the treasure itself. The treasure itself was equivalent to the body of the treasure spirit. In this case, controlling a magic treasure with a treasure spirit or controlling a magic treasure without a treasure spirit was like controlling a very obedient person or a robot that needed to be manually controlled every movement. It was easy to imagine the difference between them. Because of this, when the 81 treasure spirits returned to the magic treasure, they instantly took over the pressure that was originally acting on Luo Fan's body. This made him feel relaxed, and he felt that his control over these magic treasures had greatly deepened. After completely controlling these treasures, Luo Fan recalled what he had comprehended in the past thousands of years. It was the mystery of the mysterious formation that he had obtained from the cultivation path of the Holy Venerate. The endless mystery slowly flowed in his heart, and the various things that he was going to do next formed a rehearsal in his mind for the last time. After finishing this last process, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. His eyes flashed with a profound light, and he raised his hand to release 81 strands of magical power, which were poured into the 81 magical weapons. As his mana was injected, the 81 treasures began to vibrate slightly, and each treasure began to emit a light that was 100 times stronger than normal. These lights were of different colors, but when mixed together, it did not seem the slightest bit chaotic. Instead, it was like an incomparably beautiful painting that naturally made people feel relaxed and happy. This was the treasure spirits of the 81 treasures. After receiving Luo Fan's mana, they began to fully mobilize the power of these treasures to cooperate with Luo Fan's actions. Luo Fan's heart moved, and he waved his hand. The 81 treasures scattered in an instant, and then reunited again, directly forming 9 pieces in front of Luo Fan. After the 81 magic treasures were divided into 9 pieces, each of them began to form an extremely deep communication with the other 8 magic treasures that were in the same piece as them. The power of each treasure began to flow into the other 8 treasures, gradually stringing them together. The power of the 9 treasures inside each piece was connected to each other, tightly binding them together, making them inseparable. This made it impossible for any of the treasures to be separated from the other treasures. Under such circumstances, these 9 pieces of magic treasures actually formed 9 complete bodies. In this process, the light emitted by the 9 pieces became purer and purer under the support of the power of the 9 treasures inside. In the end, there were only 9 extremely pure and clear treasure lights left in front of Luo Fan. These are the 9 formation points. Luo Fan looked at the treasure lights with an inexplicable expression and thought to himself. Chapter 1431. Clearly, when these 9 magical treasures were combined in a specific way, they had already faintly obtained the characteristics of the holy decree. Luo Fan looked at the 9 magical treasures. With a thought, the magic power in his body split into 81 strands and poured into each of the magical treasures in a specific way. As his magic power poured in, each of the 81 magical treasures began to vibrate, even more subtly and strangely. This vibration caused the light produced by the combination of the 9 treasures to become even purer and more condensed. Moreover, the feeling of eternity and indestructibility contained within it became even more obvious. At this moment, Luo Fan could already clearly feel that the 81 treasure spirits among the 81 magical treasures had completely connected their minds. Every treasure spirits will have begun to fall into the deepest state of sleep. Only 9 collective wills were left among the 81 magical treasures. And these 9 collective wills all seem to be imperfect collective wills, as if each collective will was only a part of whole. It was as if the 9 collective wills were combined to form a complete will, and because the 9 collective wills were not complete, although they existed, they were vague and almost instinctive. They were even in a state where they did not know how to think clearly. It's time. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and a strange expression appeared on his face. He raised his hand and waved gently. The 9 pieces of treasure light instantly collided together. All the treasure light began to communicate and connect together according to some indescribable and mysterious law. In the process of this communication, the treasure light of each magical treasure began to change subtly. The 9 kinds of treasure light, as a whole, carried out an extremely strange and mysterious fusion with the other treasure light. Gradually, They combined into a formation that seemed to contain all the mysteries of a perfect world. Although this formation was not complete, one could already see its essence that surpassed everything else. He could already feel that within this formation, there was something that could shake everything. A secret that could surpass everything in the world. Faced with this formation, Luo Fan frowned slightly. Although there were only 9 nodes, the complexity of this formation was beyond imagination. Even if it was Luo Fan, he could not completely assemble this formation in one step. At this moment, although this formation looked mysterious and unfathomable, although it contained unfathomable mysteries, but it was still not the formation he wanted, not to mention the incredible power of swallowing chaos. If he wanted to raise this formation to that level, therefore, he needed to start making subtle and detailed adjustments to this formation in the following period of time, constantly making the formation itself conform to the nature of those magic treasures. Due to the changes in the magic treasures, there were some changes. Only in this way could this formation advance to a state that met Luo Fan's requirements and achieve the effect he wanted. This seemed like a subtle and meticulous adjustment process, but in fact, it was the most difficult part of the entire formation. It was also where he would spend the most time. Don't look at how Luo Fan had casually arranged this array at this time. He had only wasted a little time, so he felt that the next process would be very simple and would soon be over. In fact, it was the opposite. The time needed to adjust the formation would be at least thousands or even tens of thousands of times more than before. It was almost impossible to complete this process in a short period of time. Through many previous experiences, Luo Fan's understanding of the formation that he obtained from the Lord had reached an extremely deep level. Even compared to the Lord himself, his understanding was probably not much worse. Under such circumstances, he didn't have any doubts about how to adjust the formation according to various situations. His actions were almost instantaneous. Under his adjustments, the formation was constantly changing subtly. The aura that could even transcend heaven and earth emitted from the formation became more and more intense and obvious. On the other hand, the treasure light on the formation gradually retracted during this process, making the formation look like it was formed by 9 balls of light that were emitting all sorts of light. Following these changes, the grayish existence around the array formation was slowly repelled. A faintly discernible space-time that seemed to exist but not exist at the same time became wider and wider. This space-time was different from the space-time that was created by the power of the 81 magic treasures. The previous space-time was more like an ordinary space-time, an ordinary world. The current space-time was like an extremely empty pocket, a pocket that was waiting for the world to fill, and Luo Fan's understanding of the formation was so deep that he had already understood at the moment the strange space-time was born. It was the place that contained the chaotic state after swallowing it. This space-time itself did not have any rules. Even the 2 basic existences, time and space, seemed to be an illusory attribute. It was just that when the living creatures saw this place, they gave it the attribute for ease of understanding, which was the illusory attribute. This formation can only be considered perfect if this space-time is strong enough to accommodate the chaotic state. After understanding the nature and function of this strange space-time, Luo Fan suddenly understood. If the chaotic state was swallowed and ignored, then what was the difference between swallowing chaos and not swallowing chaos? If the mystery of the formation itself was this step, then what was the use of this formation? Only by preserving the chaotic state that was swallowed by the formation, and only by preventing the chaotic state from merging into the world and being disintegrated by the world, would this formation be considered meaningful. Only then could it be worthy of the glory of the cultivation path that the Lord had created by walking on 10 paths in a row. With the formation of this strange space-time, the 9 treasure lights seemed to have found a nest. They began to gradually integrate with this strange space-time. The process of this integration was mysterious and unpredictable. It was not similar to the integration of anything at all. It looked like the treasure lights were constantly dimming and shrinking, and the space-time was constantly getting stronger. This integration process would last for a long time to be completed. As for how long it would take, it depended on how fast Luo Fan could adjust the formation. However, as long as the integration process continued, it meant that Luo Fan did not go in the wrong direction, and it meant that he was constantly pushing the mysterious formation to a perfect state. During the process of adjusting the formation, Luo Fan could feel that the space-time was getting stronger and stronger with the adjustment. Its endurance was also becoming more and more amazing. Unknowingly, the endurance of this strange space-time had already surpassed the vast thousand domains and began to reach the gap between the world and the chaotic state, the level of the gray existence. But even so, this strange space-time was still constantly improving. This could be seen from the fact that the grayish existence in the surroundings was being pushed away and the area was becoming wider and wider. In the gap between the world and the chaotic state, time and space were in a state of extreme chaos. Here, the gray existence was being pushed away, revealing an area that wasn't gray. This process wasn't a process of changing space, but a process of changing power. In other words, as the gray existence was being pushed away, the space-time becoming wider and wider was just a feeling brought by Luo Fan's perspective. In fact, it wasn't the space that was changing. Instead, it was the relationship between the power represented by the strange space-time and the power of the gray existence that was advancing and retreating. From this point of view, the wider the area covered by the space-time, the greater the increase in the power of the formation. Therefore, from the expansion of the space-time, one could see that the power of the formation was constantly increasing. As long as this space-time is strong enough to connect the world and the chaotic state, it means that it has already surpassed the power of the gap. At that time, it will definitely be able to withstand the chaotic state. Luo Fan thought to himself as he looked at the changes taking place in the strange space-time. Thinking of this, Luo Fan looked around and found that the gray existence outside the space-time was still boundless. He couldn't see the end at all. In an instant, he knew that he had a long way to go. He sighed and calmed his mind. On one hand, he adjusted the formation according to the original method, making it more and more perfect and mysterious. On the other hand, he began to integrate his view of the world and began to modify the formation. Luo Fan had never been a cultivator who followed the rules. This formation seemed so perfect that it seemed to be enough for him to find a path that would lead him directly to the primordial chaos Tao fruit and the saint realm. However, for him, if it hadn't been integrated with the worldview, it couldn't be said to have become his. It was still only the means of a saint. The process of transforming this formation was both difficult and easy. It was difficult because the mystery contained in the formation itself was extremely profound, and his worldview of laws had not reached that stage yet. There were many mysteries that were difficult to explain with a worldview of laws. While it was said to be easy, it was because this formation was created by the Holy Exalted. On the other hand, the saint had never realized the importance of worldview. Although he had created this formation, he didn't attach his own worldview to it. In other words, he just instinctively created this formation according to the worldview of the demon realm or the living beings on earth. Under such circumstances, attaching the worldview of laws to this formation and transforming it into laws would save him the trouble of converting it with other special worldviews. He only needed to attach the worldview of laws to it. Therefore, in this process, before he began to build this formation, Luo Fan didn't know where to start. It seemed that he could adjust everywhere, but he couldn't adjust anywhere. However, at this time, after he began to build this formation, everything seemed so natural. The method of attaching the worldview of laws to it and modifying the formation was almost instantly seen by Ga. As he saw the method, he adjusted the formation. When the formation gradually became perfect, he began to consciously tilt this adjustment toward the worldview of laws. Little by little, these subtle changes. At first glance, there seemed to be no change, and there was no meaning to it. However, as time passed, and with the increase of adjustments, Luo Fan gradually felt that the formation had become more and more intimate. The various changes that originally existed in this formation that were somewhat incompatible with him actually began to gradually transform into an inexplicable familiarity amidst these various subtle changes at the beginning. Luo Fan's adjustment was an active adjustment. He needed to take the initiative to attach the worldview of laws to it. He needed to use his powerful accumulation to explain the various mysteries contained in it and reconstruct some content that did not completely conform to his explanation in his way of explanation. It was not difficult to understand, just like the formula of 2 times 3. You could explain it according to the multiplication formula. It could also be explained as the addition of 2 3s. There was no difference, but in terms of understanding, there was a huge difference. What Luo Fan did now, it was the same process. Of course, it was not as simple as explaining multiplication into addition. It was a more complicated and mysterious explanation. This explanation may not be as brilliant as the worldview of all living beings in the universe contained in the formation, but it was the most suitable explanation for Luo Fan. It was also the explanation that made Luo Fan feel the most comfortable, the most intimate, and the most perfect to grasp. But later on, as his understanding of the formation got on the right track, the formation began to reverse itself and naturally allowed his worldview to grow. Many of the mysteries contained in this formation were beyond the scope of his original worldview. Under normal circumstances, when Luo Fan encountered these mysteries, he could only slowly gnaw at them, slowly endure, improve through his own efforts, expand his worldview, and finally be able to explain these mysteries. However, this was not a normal situation. Luo Fan's understanding of these mysteries was getting deeper and deeper, and his understanding of the law transformation process was also getting deeper and deeper. In the end, the rules of the law transformation process gradually emerged, allowing Luo Fan to explain the mysteries that couldn't be explained with his incomplete worldview of the law transformation. This kind of explanation, when viewed from a different perspective, was an expansion and perfection of the worldview of laws. This caused his understanding of the formation to actually strengthen his view of the world. This unexpected gain made Luo Fan secretly happy. Now, what shackled Luo Fan's cultivation realm was not something like a bottleneck, but his accumulation. And among all these accumulations, the most important thing was his view of the world. Because his worldview wasn't perfect enough, he didn't have enough accumulation to push his cultivation to the next level. Under such circumstances, the growth of the worldview had an immediate effect on Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, he already felt that his cultivation realm was stirring, and he actually improved a little. I didn't expect to improve here, Luo Fan thought to himself, but a smile appeared on his face. Almost all the cultivators who had participated in the Tao discussion had more or less improved. Among them, there were countless level 7 and level 8 pseudo-sage cultivators who had broken through. However, as a level 6 pseudo-sage cultivator, he had even gone through 2 Tao discussions, but in the end, his cultivation realm did not improve at all. Although he had expected this, because he had just become a level 6 pseudo-sage, he was still unwilling to accept this. This was like taking an exam. A person clearly knew that he could not pass the exam, but when he really failed in the end, it was impossible for him not to feel any unwillingness. But now, when he did not expect his cultivation realm to improve, his cultivation realm had improved and been strengthened. This kind of change naturally made him inexplicably happy. There's still so much room for improvement. I wonder if I can break through to the level 6 pseudo-sage when this formation is truly constructed. Sensing that there was still a few large spaces for the formation to transform, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable anticipation. These thoughts did not linger in Luo Fan's mind for too long. Very soon, he devoted all his attention to the adjustment of the formation and the laws of the formation. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, 10,000 years passed. During these 10,000 years, Luo Fan floated motionlessly in the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos. Not far away from him, there was only an extremely strange and vast space-time. In that space-time, the 9 balls of treasure light that existed 10,000 years ago had completely disappeared at this time. They had completely fused with that strange space-time. Now, it could be said that the formation was this space-time, and this space-time was that mysterious formation. And this space-time, after 10,000 years of expansion, it had long come into contact with the 2 poles of the gap, the state of chaos and the Earth's universe below. In other words, the demon realm. It was here. The state of chaos went in. It was the Earth's universe. Although the demon realm was separated from the main body of the Earth's universe and seemed to be 2 completely different worlds, that was only on the surface. In fact, the demon realm was still a part of the Earth's universe. It still did not have the ability to transcend the Earth's universe and exist independently. Therefore, even if the world in contact with the gap belonged to the demon realm, it still belonged to the Earth's universe. It's finally done. Suddenly, Luo Fan's body trembled, and he slowly came back to his senses. Sensing the changes in his body, Luo Fan sighed with some regret. It's a pity that I still haven't broken through. In the past 10,000 years, he had constantly adjusted and changed the formation. Although the formation had finally reached this almost perfect state, and it had also obtained the qualification to directly swallow the state of chaos. However, what Luo Fan valued more was his cultivation realm. He did not obtain enough benefits in the process to break through. At this moment, although his cultivation realm had been raised to the level of the 6th level pseudo-saint, he still had not broken through to the 6th level pseudo-saint realm. He still needed to find more comprehension before he could truly step onto the 7th step below the sage realm and become a 7th level pseudo-saint. Sighing, Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a light step. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at the end of this strange world, floating outside this strange world. At the end of this strange world, there was an inexplicable barrier. This barrier was extremely strange. It seemed to exist, but also seemed not to exist. With Luo Fan's current ability, it was not difficult to break through this barrier. However, he knew that as long as he dared to break through this barrier, what awaited him would be the same fate as the incarnation that he had sent into the state of chaos. All traces of him would be completely erased by the state of chaos. Therefore, although Luo Fan clearly knew that if he was inside that space-time, he would definitely be able to control the formation more perfectly, and he would definitely be able to better understand the various mysteries of the state of chaos. However, he did not dare to stand inside at all. If the space-time broke through this barrier and drew in the state of chaos outside, the inside of that strange space-time would be like being in the state of chaos. With his ability, if he stood there, it would definitely be no different from being in the state of chaos. It would definitely be like being in the state of chaos, and all traces of his existence would be directly erased. Therefore, at this time, he could only float outside the space-time. He could only give up this opportunity to directly come into contact with the state of chaos and personally understand the mysteries of the state of chaos. Only when the state of chaos in that strange space-time lost its state of chaos due to the environment of chaos and evolved into various existences between the heavens and the earth, could he step into it and sense the mysteries within, or reconstruct and change it. I only have one chance. Even if there was no air here, Luo Fan could not help but take a deep breath as he thought about this. Although the number of the 81 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures was quite exaggerated and powerful, they were not real holy wills after all. The eternal and indestructible aura that they emitted after combining was just an aura that was forcibly simulated by the power of the treasures themselves. Under such circumstances, even if they were combined, they were still much weaker than the real holy wills.